Hey guys, tonight we're not meeting a king or a conqueror, but a wandering leaf that soothed aches, sparked rituals, and puzzled lawmakers for centuries. Cannabis. When did people first smoke it? In desert tents, mountain shrine, river ports, or somewhere older still? If you're already tucked in, don't get up, just tap like and subscribe from the pillow if this gentle, sleepy history feels right. And while you're cozy under the covers, whisper in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the light, let the fan hum, slow your breathing, and drift with me into the quiet, smoky trail this plant left through human time. The night opens in India, where the taste of bhang is faintly sweet and herbaceous, and the air around a small shrine trembles with bell metal and murmured names of Shiva. A brass bowl passes from palm to palm, thick green milk, ground with cardamom and a shy petal of rose, while incense coils upward, like a small staircase for prayers. It is not a raucous hall or a crowded fair, only a courtyard with cracked tiles warm from the day, a few sandals left in a heap by the doorway, and shadows of fig leaves swinging softly above a painted trident. When the breeze arrives, the lamps gutter, recover, and steady themselves as if they, too, are practicing breath control. Here, cannabis is not a novelty. It is folded into the tempo of devotion, a plant with household uses and festival meanings. On long nights of Mahashivaratri, many worshippers prepare bhang as an offering and a companion, something to slow the tongue and widen the inward gaze. The mixture is humble, leaves and flowers pounded into paste, drawn into milk and spice, sometimes shared in silence between a priest and a pilgrim who has walked far. The effect is neither thunder nor trumpet. It is the sense of edges softening, of the world's light turning amber at the rim, and of a story older than the listener speaking just behind the eyelids. Texts point in many directions, and scholars disagree about which passages name cannabis directly and which refer to cousins, metaphor, or ritual drinks with shifting recipes. You will hear claims and counterclaims about Vedic hymns and the word banga, about what was quaffed under stars and what was crushed at dawn. Caution fits best here. What seems likely is simpler, a long familiarity between people and plant medicine for pain, draft against heat, offering for the god who both destroys and dances. In countryside lanes, bhang can be a farmer's small relief. In urban alleys near a temple gate, it can be a sweet, cooling sip, taken with a bowed head before stepping into the noise of the day. At the shrine, a sadhu with ash upon his skin sits cross-legged, eyes half-lidded, a rudraksha bead rhythm moving almost invisibly in his fingers. Somewhere beyond the courtyard wall, a drum is tested. 4 beat, pause, 4 beats, pause. The sadhu's breath lengthens. He is not chasing visions. He is lengthening intervals between bell and bell, heartbeat and thought. The little clay chillum he lights is not theatrical. He cups the flame with a practiced hand, draws once, and lowers the pipe. The smoke is a ribbon, not a storm. The younger men do not imitate him. They want, then return to the bowl, and their soft talk about dawn. Sacred things are not always loud. Around these practices moves a daily life that gives cannabis its quieter meanings. In a kitchen with whitewashed walls, seeds toast in a pan and the scent nutty, a little grassy floats into the courtyard, soon crushed into chutney that will be dolloped beside flatbread. In a dim storeroom, a bundle of coarse hemp twine hangs from a nail, waiting to tie a basket or mend a cot. This is the texture that often disappears in grand histories, the way a plant is handled before it is named, the way hands memorize it. In many towns, the language of use is calm and specific: leaf for this, fiber for that, oil for something else, and only later does the air grow complicated with courts and decrees. Across the subcontinent, pilgrims have carried small habits between regions like ember and ash in a brass pot. What begins as an offering in one place become, in another, a remedy for stiffness after walking. A brass shopkeeper scribbles measures onto a slate, so many tola, so many annas, while a schoolboy, drowsy from the afternoon sun, watches the pestle turn in the mortar and imagines that the green paste is a map of rivers seen from a very high temple. Ritual and ordinary life overlap in India the way 2 saris overlap on a clothesline. Separate patterns, one draped over another, moving in the same breeze. When did people first smoke it? India's answer is modest. Perhaps not first, perhaps not last, but certainly long. Smoking here takes different forms, sometimes a chillum shared among initiates who agree, without saying. To keep the moment small, sometimes a single person under a neem tree at dusk, lifting a clay pipe once or twice, and then letting it go out. The act is framed by custom, a bowed head toward the god's image, a sip of water from a clean brass cup, a mindful pause before words return, where evidence is blurrier. Exact recipe, exact dates, the voices of the faithful lean toward continuity rather than origin. It is not a race to the first spark, it is a long keeping of embers. If you listen, you can hear how other worlds will later touch this one. Trade will tighten the knots between port cities. Travelers will ferry seeds in their pockets with prayers and salt. Philosophers will write sentences that later readers argue into proof, far away. In places we'll visit soon, Greek physicians will make tidy notes. Roman shipyards will hum with hemp rope. Persian mystics will tend fire altars. And along the Silk Road, a plant will change masks without changing itself. But tonight, in this first quiet courtyard, the story is slower. A bell chimes twice. The fan above your bed hums. Somewhere a priest is rinsing a brass bowl. The sadhu's eyes open fully, clear and unhurried, as if he has returned from a narrow bridge between thoughts. In the lane outside, two children slip past the gate with a whisper and a giggle. Their shadows stretch along the wall like brushstroke. Above them, the fig leaves keep making their small corrections to the moonlight. The plant's smoke, if anyone lit it at all, has already thinned into the warm dark. What remains is the shape of the practice, preparation, offering, breath. The sense that a common leaf can widen a room until it includes, for a little while, the person you were hoping to become. In this way, India offers not a declaration, but a posture. Shoulders lowered, gaze softened, the old questions asked again without hurry. Where did the first smoke rise? Perhaps in many places at once. Perhaps here, where plants and gods and people have kept each other company for so long that beginnings and middles and endings feel like different names for the same long night. Night in the southern hills of China is a meticulous quiet, the kind that seems arranged by hand. A courtyard well reflects a square of sky. Bamboo knocks a soft metronome against the eave. Inside a small Taoist hermitage, a brass burner warms by stages. First the charcoal, then the crushed aromatic, sandalwood scraping, resin crumbs, a pinch of something green and bitter from a pouch tied with red cord. The priest moves carefully, as if accuracy were a form of kindness. He is not summoning spectacle. He is building a room inside the air. Taoist practice is a long study of breath, how to lengthen it, flavor it, calm it, hide it. In one lineage, breath is guided through the body like a lamp through a corridor. In another, breath is allowed to settle until it chooses its own courtyard. The smoke rising from the burner is neither command nor cure. It is a suggestion. Some texts speak of smokes that communicate with spirits, of mixtures suitable for meditation on mountain nights, of incense that draws the mind into a single point until even that point loosened. What precisely lay in each mixture likely varied by teacher, temple, and season. Recipes were often partial on purpose, a veil to keep the careless from copying tone without meaning. Still, in the small practical world of the hermitage, clay cups, reed broom, paper talismans curling on a shelf. A plant with many names appears, sometimes as incense, sometimes as seed or oil, occasionally as medicine folded into a larger pattern of practice. It's helpful to remember how order and openness coexisted here. Taoists, with their taste for recluses and cloud-dwelling metaphors, were not anarchists of the body. Many preferred regularity so gentle that the body accepted it like weather. The rituals around smoke were quiet and formal. A table wiped clean, sleeves arranged, 3 bows that belonged to no one, and a burner set between Nara. The smoke itself wasn't a ladder to visions, so much as a screen where the breath could watch itself. When the priest exhaled, the ribbon bends, notices, and returns. And ordinary physics turned into teaching. If any herb in the mixture eased pain, loosened the muscles behind the eye, or stilled the small chatter that collects at the lip of sleep, it did so as part of a choreography the practitioners already knew by heart. Sit, align, watch, soften. Not every school agreed. In the town below, the county yamen keeps accounts on bamboo slips that have become paper, and the magistrate prefers the crispness of lists to the softness of smoke. Confucian habits, with their love of naming relationships and ranking duties, sometimes regarded altered states as suspicious shortcuts, useful perhaps in ritual, dangerous in study, unsettling in government. A clerk working late will stop to wet his brush and frown toward the hills, thinking how the world must be balanced. Poetry allowed but bound to calendar, devotion permitted but returned to ledger. He is not a villain. He is a guardian of doors, making sure the right ones are used at the right times. In his mind, incense fits better in ancestral halls than in private experiments with mood. And yet, history rarely obeys a single mood. In farmhouses strung along the river, hemp is a first language. It waits in bundles by the loom. It becomes twine, sandals, fishing nets. It is a smell that means work. A mother rubs a little oil onto a child's elbow, where yesterday's fall has left a bruise. A grandfather, stiff at the waist from fieldwork, chews a few medicinal seeds and says nothing except that the weather is turning. No one here speaks of states of consciousness or alchemy. They talk about strength, mending, rest. When a traveling practitioner passes through offering small packets of fragrant powder, something to steep in hot water on nights when the lungs are tight, the farmers listen politely, buy a little, and return to their ordinary cures. Bodies learn both doctrine and dit back up the slope. The priest tends his burner through the length of the night meditation. The mixture changes character as it warms. First resin sweet, then grassy, then a faint, almost peppery tone that seems to sharpen the shape of silence. The monk keeps his spine like a bamboo pole in wind, pliant but upright. From time to time he dampens his fingers, pinches the coal, stirs the ash, rests his hands on his knee. He is not hunting visions. He is listening for the tiny settling sounds the mind makes when it finds the right stone in the river and stops wobbling. There are texts carefully copied, carefully argued that catalog plants according to temperament, warming or cooling, moistening or drying, helpful to this organ system, a bit too strong for that temperament. Some place cannabis among useful herbs when properly paired and measured. Others pass it by with a brief note. Still others caution that too much smoke makes the will lazy. Even where smoking is mentioned, the language can be oblique. Fumigation, perfumed chambers, spirit-inviting incense. Scholars today trace etymologies and commentaries across centuries. Comparing recipes like astronomers compare faint light. No single line proves the practice. A constellation does. If you stood outside the hermitage, you would see almost nothing. Only a door-guarding charm, a thin thread of smoke escaping the rafters, and the regular promise of breath from a room with no lamp. What you cannot see is how carefully these practitioners ring-fence their experiment. A senior disciple's evening might include a short period of incense inhalation for stillness. A novice's training might forbid it, insisting first on months of posture, diet, and quiet calligraphy, so the hand learns what patience feels like. This wasn't thrill-seeking. This was housekeeping of the spirit, and the house had rules. By sunrise, the burner is mostly ash. The priest empties it into the garden, where the ash will join the ordinary dirt and disappear. He drinks hot water, sweeps the floor, copies a few lines from a text that talks about water learning from stone and stone learning from time. Down in the town, the magistrate starts his day with petitions and seal stamps. The clerk, after a yawn and a complaint about his pillow, copies a regulation concerning the proper use of incense during civic rites. On a side street, a weaver ties off a new length of hemp cord with the automatic grace that comes from a lifetime of small, necessary knots. How did smoking fit into this wider world? Carefully, and not always openly. Where temple communities allowed it, it was a tool inside a ritual container. Where officials frown, it slipped behind poetry and euphemism or retreated to the countryside. If someone climbed a mountain with a scroll, a kettle, and a pouch of herbs to keep their breath gentle in cold air, no one wrote a decree about it. If a teacher kept a tin of fragrant powder to share with a student wrestling with sleep and grief, it was an act of compassion, not rebellion. And if, in certain retreats, a vessel's smoke was drawn slowly and shared among a few, the meaning was less about intoxication than about making a small agreement with the night. We will be quiet, and the night will be kind. In time, stories will travel westward of priests who inhaled the cosmos and civil servants who filed forms about it the next morning. Those stories will flatten. They always do. But here inside one careful room, the practice holds its shape. Light. Stir. Breathe. Sit. And let the mind step down from its own ladder. The bamboo still clicks against the eaves. The well reflects a pale coin of dawn, and the smoke that helped keep the room together has gone where smoke always goes, leaving only its instruction behind. Be gentle, be exact. Be small enough to pass through any gate. Egypt begins in a hush, a reed bed stirring, a water bird lifting, the Nile turning its slow shoulder toward another year. Inside a small chapel along the river's edge, a priestess trims a lamp and sets out a shallow dish of unguent. The ointment is pale and glossy, a little bitter on the air, fat softened over coals, then perfumed with resin, petal, and a measure of crushed green that a household healer might also use for aches. In that twilight between offering and remedy, plants share the same table. The goddess receives what people also need. Ancient Egyptian rooms understood smell. Raisins from far caravans burned in cone-shaped incense. Oils carried memories of marsh and garden. Smoke wove thin veils through prayer. The balms that moved across temples and palaces did more than sweeten air. They consecrated, soothed, protected, and, when needed, masked the world's harsh edges, river damp, animal labor, summer rot. Somewhere inside those recipes, subtle and adaptable, lived additions that modern readers try to name with certainty. Sometimes the naming is clear, often it is not. A scribe, meticulous as sunrise, writes fragrant herb. And the centuries lean forward asking which one. In a courtyard behind a midwife's house, mortars sit in a row, each stained a different tone of green-brown from years of use. A mother prepares a poultice for her sister, who labors upstairs. Seeds are warmed and pounded with honey and oil, not to promise miracles, but to make the body more comfortable with its own work. An older woman, hands vain, voice gentle, keeps time between contractions with a chant she learned from her mother. Here the plant belongs to women long before it belongs to law. Where the leaves are chewed, the pain lightens. Where the oil touches skin, muscles decide to release. Recipes vary by village and season, a language spoken in households more than in courts. A papyrus unrolled on a low table contains remedies copied and recopied. Soaps of natron, pastes of fig, poultices of bread and milk, and, in a few lines, mentions that later readers align with cannabis. We call it the Eber's Papyrus, a long bandage of knowledge. Part prayer, part pharmacology. Its instructions are practical: how to grind, steep, strain, which ailment suggests which preparation, what to avoid when fever is high or bowel stubborn. The text is a river of advice, and in its swirls we glimpse a plant moving among many others, neither demon nor marvel. One note in a scale of care. Scholars caution us here. Words echo across ages with different spellings and neighbors. Plant families shift with trade and climate. A paste in Thebes may not match one in Memphis. Patient language suits the evident. May have. Likely. Appears to. In workshop light, two apprentices knead perfumed cones that palace attendants will later set atop wigs at banquets, so that the warmth of bodies melts scent slowly over the evening. The ingredients list reads like a roadmap of empire myrrh and frankincense from distant land, lotus from the canal, the herb that grows like a weed near the house wall, and also, when cultivated carefully, gives fiber that makes a strong cord. Elite ointments mirror the world that paid for them. Complex, traveling, intended to last beyond the moment. If some portion of those balms borrowed a quiet property of cannabis, its way of relaxing a furrowed brow or easing the small heaviness behind the eyes, it would have joined the blend without calling attention to itself. Luxury in Egypt preferred harmony over headline. The temple scene is slower. A priest with shaved scalp grinds aromatics in a bowl of hard stone. Each turn of the pestle makes a low, sandy scrape. He adds a pinch of dried leaves, then a tear of resin that softens when it meets the warmed oil. The mixture will anoint a statue's feet and hands. It will shine the wood and wake the room. Smoke is not simply smoke here. It marks a boundary where the ordinary steps aside and the sacred walks through. If a participant draws a little of that warm, musky air deeper into the chest and feels the mind loosen slightly from the day's concern, no one names it as a separate act. The ritual itself is the drink. Outside, the practical world keeps giving the plant work to do. Hemp twine dries on a line by the river, ready to bind thatch or fix a fish trap. A boy, tasked with patching a basket, bites a knot tight and tests the weave with his thumb. An older fisherman rubs a little oil into sore fingers, flexes and knot. This is the second life of sacred things in Egypt, the way prayer and rope share a root and a smell. In palaces and estates, stewards make lists: hemp for cordage, flax for linen, barley for bread, and men write numbers in ink so black it still startles the eye under museum glass. Economy records what worship breathes. Claims sometimes run ahead of evidence. There are notes about traces on mummified remains that later studies debate. There are confident lines in popular books that scholars quietly soften. Rather than building pyramids from pebbles, it is kinder to the past to set each stone with care. Weak in scent, plants traveled in sacks slung from donkeys along desert roads. Healers experimented inside traditions that trusted observation. Priests believed that scent opened doorways. We can add, cannabis likely appeared among temple and household materials, as seed, oil, fiber, and, at times, as a component of incense or ointment. We can end the sentence with a gentle comma, where others prefer a period at a banquet. Musicians lift harps and flutes, while guests recline on low couches. Servants bring trays, bread still warm, duck glaze, figs split open and shiny. The air is a palimpsest of flavors and perfume. Guests touch their perfumed cones and smile at the small, satisfying give beneath the skin of scent. Conversation drifts to irrigation and taxes, to a daughter's betrothal, to a rumor that the flood will be generous this year. A physician at the edge of the room holds a cup of beer and thinks about a patient whose joints ache in the cold. Tomorrow he'll try a liniment with more oil and a different balance of herbs. He will not name any single plant a cure. He will adjust until the patient sleeps better. Night along the Nile is not black but layered. Stars find the river and lay bright coins in the current. A crocodile turns without hurt. In the distance, a field guard coughs, then laughs with a companion in the pitch-dark comfort that only men who work night water know. Inside a linen-draped room, a woman recovering from childbirth watches a lamp flame and counts its small movements. A poultice cools her skin. A relative dabs her forehead and hums the same tune the midwife used earlier. The plant is nearby in this room, though not always present, part of the chest with the household remedies, part of the muscle memory of care. And finally, the embalmer's workshop, where care extends beyond breath. Resins and oils carry the body from one climate to another, teaching the flesh to remain. The mixtures here are precise and often secret. Each guild, proud of a method that makes a family's last memory of a face a good one. Incense clouds soften the air for workers who stand long hours. A novice learns to breathe shallowly through the mouth and to rub a little oil into the crease, where thumb meets palm to keep the hand steady. Knowledge moves forward here the way the river does, quietly, persistently, always returning to channels that work. If we return to the opening question, when did people first smoke it? Egypt answers with practicality. Perhaps someone, somewhere along a temple corridor, drew a perfumed smoke into the lungs as part of worship. Perhaps someone else, a laborer at the end of a long day, took a small, warming draft from a pipe or a brazier and slept easier. The record is generous with uses and shy about methods. What is clear is the plant's hospitality, how it accepted roles from rope to remedy, from altar to alley, without insisting on being the center of any room. Near dawn, the river swallows the stars. The priestess wipes the rim of the unguent dish with a soft cloth. The midwife rinses her mortar. The fisherman rolls his cord. The embalmer closes a cabinet. Breath by breath, the city resets its rooms for daylight and the scents of night thin into the ordinary morning. The plant remains, folded into jars, tied in bundles, pressed into oil, written into lines. It will be there when the next headache visits, when the next festival calls, when the next rope needs a splice, in Egypt as elsewhere. The story keeps choosing usefulness over origin, care over claim, and a steady hand over any rush to be first. Evening gathers over a Greek port town the color of warm limestone. The sea breathes against the quay, and a light salt damp settles on the colonnade. In a physician's small courtyard, a clay lamp burns steadily beside a stack of wax tablets. He has spent the day visiting patients, one with a swollen knee, one with a winter cough that refuses to leave. And now he writes in the unshowy way that medicine prefers. Symptoms first, preparations next, doses last. Nearby, a mortar holds the faint green smear of a poultice he has been testing. Oil infused with aromatic, thickened with ground seeds from a plant known in many regions for fiber, rope, and the practical virtues that keep harbors working. He makes no proclamation. He simply notes what the patient reported after rubbing it into the joint before sleep. a little ease, a quieter night. Greek medicine, especially in the Hippocratic habit, was a choreography of observation. What heat does to a body, what cold takes away, how food and regimen tune the instrument. If a plant relieved an ache or softened a spasm, it found a modest place among many tools. Later writers will catalog these uses more explicitly. Some will gather the plant into lists of simple, remark on its seeds, and suggest mixtures for pain or inflammation. The language in such texts tends to be temperate, helpful when measured, unhelpful when overused, best when paired correctly. Where smoking appears, it is often tucked among words for fumigation, incense, and perfumed air. Practices as old as shrines and as ordinary as winter sickroom. Down the street, a symposium readies itself. Cushions arranged around low tables, garlands waiting to be tied. A crater set in the center for mixing wine with water so that talk will last longer and end kinder. The doorway is a filter for the evening's worlds. Fishmongers' cries go thin and distant. Flute music thickens. The scent of braised olives and warm bread rises to meet the first guests. There is a place in this room for argument and another for rest. A place for the biting epigram and another for a silence no one rushes to fill. Incense threads the air lightly. It is possible, especially in households where guests carry habits from farther east, that a brazier adds a different perfume for a few moments, shared among a tiny group who do not intend spectacle. The point is not to dazzle, but to soften the angle of thought, so stories can make the turn they need. At the threshold between clinic and symposium is the world of materials. A sailor wraps his palm with a strip of hemp cord to lift a jar. A porter checks the stitching on a net. A woman binds reeds for a mat with a twine that takes dye poorly, but takes strain bravely. The plant's fiber is a local fact, even when its smoke is not. Those who write about society's health often preferred the steadiness of rope to the pliancy of mood. Sobriety, in civic imagination, kept ships straight and juries lucid. Yet the Greeks were not strangers to careful alteration. Wine diluted and seasoned was a technology of sociability. Incense clarified rooms for worship. Medicinal fumigations dried, warmed, or soothed the body with intention. If smoke from a particular herb sometimes joined these practices, it did so within the same logic. Purpose first, moderation always. A scribe copying a physician's compendium leans on his left elbow and mouths the words as he recites them to his hand. He pauses over a line that mentions seeds pressed for oil, and another that suggests a topical application for joint pain. He adds a marginal note to remind himself which merchant on the East Dock sells good stock and which waters it. He is not thinking of philosophy. He is thinking of quality control. In the city's library, a scholar sets a book beside another and notices how different writers name the same plant. How one emphasizes cordage and another medicament. How a third complains about idlers who overindulge and waste daylight. Culture speaks with many throats at once. The cautious reader learns to listen for harmony rather than a single melody. If we enter a small temple at dusk, we may find the priest trimming the wick of a lamp and adding tears of resin to a dish that will warm on a flat stone. The sweet, thick smoke marks the room as set apart, a machine for slowing thought. Someone coughs and smiles. Someone else closes their eyes and whispers a line of verse that names the god without asking for anything. When the night is wet and chill, a perfumed fumigation is also a kindness to lungs and spirit. No one debates doctrine tonight. Devotion is a practical art. Arrive, breathe. Remember, go home gentler than you came. Across town, a household nurse tucks a wool blanket around an elder plagued by sleeplessness. She heats oil, rubs it into thin knee, and leaves a small sachet by the pillow, fragrant, dry, meant to comfort as much by association as by any property a physician might name. If she has heard from a cousin in the islands about a smoke that eases nerves when inhaled lightly, she may not mention it at all. She may, on rare evening, add a whisper of that scent to the room while the elder dozes, pleased by the reminder of summers when fishing nets dried along the shore, and the mind knew how to idle without worry. Evidence of such moments rarely enters the record, not because they did not occur, but because no one thought to legislate ordinary mercies. The Greeks wrote often about measure. Philosophers weighed pleasure against the virtuous life, like gold against grain. Playwrights joked about banquets that slid from grace into stupidity. Lawgivers tried to protect mornings from the wreckage of nights too bright. Within that moral weather, altered breath occupied ambiguous ground, acceptable as incense, respectable as remedy, suspicious as pastime. A young man boasting of smoky adventures at a drinking party would be mocked as quickly as one who bragged of unwatered wine. Meanwhile, an austere thinker might walk the portico, quietly grateful for the way a certain temple's air helped his chest loosen in winter, and never think to call it intoxication. Sail north, and the wind stiffen. Hemp rigging hums when pulled tight. A sailor's hands polish it with use until it shines. The ship's physician, a practical soul with salt in his beard, keeps a small chest of remedies near the tiller. Vinegar, dried herbs, oil, strips of linen. Are labeled in a tidy hand with the name of the plant we are following. He uses it to pat a splint, to make a poultice, to coax a stubborn knot to lie flat. On a raw night, when a deckhand coughs and shivers, the physician warms a little oil, rubs it into the chest, and lets the man breathe the steam rising from a bowl of water poured onto a heated stone. He does not claim cures. He keeps men comfortable enough to sleep. The literary world, too, has its quiet threads. Poets tuck images of rope, smoke, and evening into lines about longing and homecoming. A philosopher, constructing an analogy for habit and virtue, chooses the familiarity of hemp cord, how it is strong, not because a single fiber is strong, but because many are laid together and twisted. Metaphors reveal what a culture touches every day, even if few lines speak plainly about drawing plant smoke through a pipe. The culture that knew the plant intimately in field and harbor would not find its scent foreign when it entered a room for some other purpose, where claims press beyond what the sources can bear. Language softened. Scholars today remind us that later compilers stitched together practices from many places and centuries. That Greek authors sometimes described foreign customs with a blend of curiosity and condescension. That medical recommendations often traveled without their cautions attached. If a reader ever insists on a single Greek origin for smoking cannabis, the evidence resists being lined up in marching order. What emerges instead is a field of uses: fiber, oil, seed, fumigation, topical in a set of rooms where scented air made sense. Clinic, shrine, sick room, ship, the port quiet. The physician closes his tablets and covers the mortar. At the symposium, talk ebbs to low, companionable sound, and someone opens the door to let the night reset the room's balance. In the temple, the last trace of incense unbraids into the sky. A watchman tests a knot in the harbor and grunts approval. Ordinary Greek life, which prized clarity, left space for gentle means of softening, means that asked little of the body except patience, and that returned the mind to itself without fuss. If we put the question to Greece, when did people first smoke it? The answer is a shrug shaped like wisdom. Not first, not loudly, not as a banner, and often not as a separate act at all. More often, it was part of other acts: healing, honoring, speaking well into the night. Where texts speak clearly, we follow them. Where they do not, we let the culture's habits guide our imagination towards scenes that fit its temperament. Measured, civic-minded, fond of talk, and careful with tools that change the weather inside a person. The lamp in the courtyard gutters once, and steady. The sea keeps its slow counting at the quay. Somewhere, a nurse sets down a bowl and listens for the change in a sleeper's breath that tells her dawn will be kind. Morning in Ostia begins with rope. Coils of hemp lie like sleeping serpents along the quay, their fibers salt-stiff and sun-paled, their smell half-river, half-field. A dockhand slides a cord through his palm to check for snag, then leans back into the weight of a moored hull so the knot takes cleanly. Above him, a square sail dries in a faint breeze, patches upon patches. Seems straight as law. Rome trusted what it could bind. Before the empire was argument, it was infrastructure. Roads like tendon, aqueducts like ribs, ships whose throats and muscles were hemp. In the rigger's yard, boys learn by tut. One twists strands together on a simple spindle, while another keeps tension with a stick. A third rubs the finished line with oil and tallow to weather it. An older man inspects the work with the same squint he uses for reading prices, chalked on an amphora. He remembers campaigns when hemp tents held off winter rain just long enough for the first sleep, when a snapped rope told more truth than a shouted order. For soldiers and sailors, the plant was not philosophy. It was reliability canvas that didn't tear. lines that didn't rot too quickly, a stitch that kept a pack close. In a modest domus not far from the docks, a matron warms oil over a brazier and drops in a pinch of seeds. The scent turns nutty. She pours a little into a dish to rub on an old scar along her forearm and saves the rest for dressing greens at meal's end. The household steward, a practical mind, has noted which merchants' sacks run clean and which are cut with chaff. He buys flax for fine linen and hemp for all the things that are used hard and forgiven. Rome's genius was not only marble, it was also storeroom, shelves of twine, baskets, sandals, net weights, and tools that spoke a quiet language of maintenance, medicine. At the city's center and in its fringes, took notes. A physician in a Sabura clinic copies from a well-thumbed compendium onto a fresh wax tablet. Seeds expressed for oil, poultice for joints, fumigations for certain stubborn ailments. He arranges such recommendations, among others, vinegar, fig, wool grease, wine reduced by half, never claiming marvels, never promising what the body will not allow. Another, in a villa outside the wall, writes to a colleague about a salve that seems to soften spasm if the patient is bathed and rested first. These texts, stitched from Greek and local knowledge, prefer the tone of artisan, measure, observe, adjust. Where inhaled smoke is mentioned, it appears under the broad household umbrella of fumigation. Alongside myrrh and resin and the warming comfort of scented air, when lungs are thick with weather. Public virtue worried about excess. The Roman imagination, trained on duty and daylight, feared the disorder that followed certain nights. Moralists grumbled about idleness in any form, whether it came from too much theater or too much perfume. Their essays, salt with common sense and a touch of thunder, praised sobriety as a civic force. Jurors must judge. Architects must measure. The forum must sound like business, not dream. Within that weather of opinion, altered breath often needed a warrant ritual. Physician, winter, enshrined. Incense was a citizen like any other. In clinics, fumigation was a remedy. At home, perfumed smoke could be a nurse's kindness. Loud intoxication belonged to satire, not to the good life. Quiet easing of pain belonged to ordinary mercy. The legions moved the plant as they moved habits. A standard bearer remembers the smell of canvas drying after rain along the Rhine. A resin note threaded through wet wool and leather. In a frontier fort, a tesserarius checks tent lines before night watch, palms stinging where roughness bite. A medicus keeps a chest, bandages, vinegar, honey, dried herbs, a jar of oil thick with the green-gold color of pressed seed. He has learned that a little rubbed into the lower back steadies certain men enough to sleep. He has also learned to say enough at the right moment, because the army's grammar is brevity. Mart, men, wait. In the city's markets, hemp blends with the ordinary spectacle of supply. A rope seller runs a knife along a new coil to show its even core. A sandal maker trades worn straps for fresh. Fishermen bargain for net twine and go home to stitch through the afternoon. Foreheads creased in the particular patience that making requires. A scribe in a taberna library, tasked with copying a chapter from a natural historian, lifts his eyebrows at a line claiming this plant does this, that plant does that. He has copied enough authorities to know that some were better at linking rumors than confirming them. He smooths the papyrus and adds his care instead of his complaint, the letters straight. The name spelled as tradition preferred. Temples controlled air. In a shaded portico, a priest places pastilles on a warming plate. The smoke anchors the room to its purpose. The gestures are old, their edges sanded by centuries of repetition. A few breaths deeper than usual are part of the rite. They prepare the body for the mind's work. No one calls this a drug. It is atmosphere, as necessary to reverence as a clean garment and washed hand. Outside, a petitioner waiting his turn inhales what drifts and discovers his shoulders lowering. He will attribute this to the god, and perhaps, in a way beyond doctrine. He is right. Baths. Those civic lungs offer another scene. A brazier in the epitaterium perfumes the steam faintly. The talk is low. Partisan in its way chariot, generals, bread prices, and punctuated by the sound of water lifting, falling. A masseur works warmed oil into an old man's knees and says, as men have always said while helping, that the weather will change tomorrow for the better. Here, too, remedies hide in plain view. A seed pressed for oil is a food. A food rubbed into skin becomes a medicine. A medicine, when breathed as vapor in a damp room, becomes a shared comfort. The transitions are not sharp, Roman-like, expert in practical gradations. Understood that. Writers who praised the old ways, most maiorum, tended to like hemp best when it behaved like rope. They were not cruel. They were custodians of continuity. But even they, walking home past the Tiber at dusk, would have recognized the mercy in a brazier's scent easing a cough, or calming a mind that carried too much ledger and too little sleep. A Stoic could defend such relief, use what is at hand, but keep the helm. The virtue is not in refusing help. It is in remaining master of the self while accepting it. Beyond Rome, in provinces stitched together by shorelines and mile markers, the plant follows the empire's roots. In North Africa, a shipyard hums frames on trestles, tar heating in pot, voices bargaining in 3 languages. A woman mends a fishing net in the shade of a whitewashed wall, lips counting the knots. In Britain, wind combs through lines that sing when the tension is right. A garrison clerk ticks off inventory pila, loricae, corda, and opens a crate to check for damp. He smells earth and fiber, thinks of the farm he left in Umbria, and writes good in the column. Scholars today lift the sources carefully. Some passages in the encyclopedists praise utility. Some medical writers note seeds and oils. A few lines accuse leisure of turning to stupor when misused. Claims about widespread recreational smoking in Roman streets do not rest on firm ground. The record is steadier when it speaks of fiber, food, ointment, and the scented spaces of ritual or cure. Where inhalation appears, it is usually inside a frame, fumigation to dry or soothe, incense to sacralize, rather than as a vocation of idlers. Language like likely may have is suggested by, keeps us honest, and lets the picture sharpen without hardness. As evening returns to Ostia, the riggers hang tomorrow's coils, where the breeze can touch them. The dockhand flexes his palm and finds a new splinter of fiber to worry out with his teeth. He laughs, spits, and calls goodnight to a friend, headed toward the baths. A physician shutters his window and leaves the faint green ring in a mortar to wash in the morning. In a shrine, the last curl of smoke turns translucent and disappears into the same air that smells of river and tar. Rome's answer to our persistent question, when did people first smoke it, is the answer Rome gave to many questions. It depends on purpose. As rope, the plant held empires together. As oil and seed, it fed and soothed. As smoke, it belonged to rooms with reasons. The empire distrusted fog for its own sake. It loved tools that, used wet, kept the day from fray. Night settled, weaving its own net between pilasters and masts. Somewhere, a child counting knots on a practice line forgets the number and begins again. The sea breathes, the city, methodical even at rest, tucks its work away without losing its place, and the hemp that kept everything tied waits patiently for morning. Rain lifts from a frontier plain the way steam lifts from a kettle slowly, as if reluctant to stop doing what it's learned. On the rampart of a timber fort, a sentry drags his cloak tighter and watches the road gleam like a length of poured lead. Below him, in the yard behind the barracks, 2 recruits twist strands of pale fiber into a cord, while an older soldier keeps tension with a stick and a patient jaw. The rhythm is the same in Britain, in Gaul. Along the Rhine or the Danube, spin, lay, twist, test, nod, then coil the line, and hang it where rain cannot bully it into rot. The empire spoke many languages, but everywhere it spoke repair. Hemp traveled inside that grammar of mending. It went where soldiers went, rolled in a blanket, stitched into a kit, sown in the ditch beside a road when someone with sense noticed a patch of ground that would take a hardy crop. In market towns that clung like burrs to fort gates, seed found soil and neighbors found uses. A potter cut hemp into clay to temper it. A tanner learned that rope stretched over a drying frame liked to be hemp rather than anything else. A woman who kept chickens bought a scoop of seeds because the birds grew glossy and steady on them, and later, after a talk with the midwife, kept a small jar of the oil near her hearth for nights when her hands ached from winter washing. The legions were couriers of habit. When a cohort moved, small geographies moved with them, recipes, dice game, lullaby, and the unshowy techniques that make a hard life softer. A carpenter who had learned in Sicily how to splice a line cleanly taught the trick to a boy from Noricum, who would one day teach it to his own boy in a village whose name the empire never bothered to record. Seeds tucked in a pouch did not ask permission. They sprouted in damp corners of yards. They made a fringe of rough green along drainage channels. They learned new dawns and winds, and still did what they had always done: offer fiber that held and oil that eased. In a rainy garrison far from anywhere, a citizen would brag about living. A medicus poured warm water over a heated stone and set the bowl beneath a nose that coughed too stubbornly. He added nothing fancy, only what the supply clerk could order and the climate would keep. Later, he rubbed oil into the tight rope of muscle that runs from neck to shoulder and told the soldier to sleep, to try not to dream of home. The medicus did not argue philosophy. He believed in rest, given when rest could be given. If the oil made the difference, it was a small difference. And small differences were what kept the night from tearing. Landscapes learned the plant's profile. In valleys where flax had been the old companion, hemp joined rather than replaced fields, alternating like sentences that needed both long and short words. Redding ponds, those shallow, mucky rectangles where stems steeped to loosen fiber took on the faintly sweet, faintly sour smell that settles into the memory of people who grow up near them. Children cut across the margins on the way to fetch water and pull up their sandals with theatrical disgust when mud grabbed and wouldn't let go. Farmers watched the sky for the right week to pull the bundles and spread them on grass to dry. Somewhere a steward counted how many lengths of rope the estate would need before winter, and a millwright checked the teeth of a wooden brake used for breaking the stalks, thinking about a better angle that might save a thumb. Archaeology, centuries later, would find only shreds of this life pollen in river mud, seeds in a ditch, a thread caught in a nail's rust, a word for hemp in a place where the language had become a braid of many languages at once. That is how quiet empires make their map, not on marble with a triumph swagger, but in ditch, in small ponds, in the smell of wet fiber, in the way hands learn without boasting. A tax roll might notice an increase in cordage. A requisition might specify rope length for a bridge. A letter might mention oil for aching men, and then all of it would go on without needing to be named again. North Africa received hemp in harbors that were already schools of skill. Shipwrights laid keels, rope walks launched. Straight lanes where strands were walked and twisted made lines as even as verse. Inland, near a river that tried to retire every August, a farm steward argued with a tenant about where to put the retting pit so the smell would bother the fewest and the women could still reach water easily for washing. They compromised in the way people do badly and then better. And the next year, the pit moved 10 paces north, and everyone pretended that had been the plan. The plant did not care. It did its work wherever it was allowed to root. In Britain, hemp learned wind. Lines hung to dry sang a thin, exact note when tension was right, and a boy who preferred the rope walk to school followed that song like a thread through his days. He will not be in any history. He will know how to keep a line from twisting back on itself at the last moment, how to smell rot a week before it shows, and how to talk to a foreman in a way that gets him what he needs without getting anyone in trouble. If he grows old, his palms will have the polished look of wood that has been handled for years, and he will swear that oil rubbed into knuckles at the end of a cold day matters more than any poem Rome ever wrote. Along the Rhine, a farmer stands with a river at his back and reads the slope of a field as if it were a page. Rye here, barley there, hemp on the strip that stays damp through July. He is not thinking of empire. He is thinking of the millstone that needs a rope, the roof that needs a strap, the cradle that needs a cord strong enough to hang from a beam and swing without creaking. The plant suits his pragmatism. It grows fast, forgives mediocre soil, and if retted and broken with care, yields fiber that tolerates the clumsy hands of neighbors borrowing a tool. Words traveled with the plant and then became local. A Latin term hardened into the sound of a new language. A Gaulish or Germanic root braided itself around the tongue the way two strands want a third to hold. Market cries simplified foreign syllable. A rope seller's sign pictured what the letters failed to convince. That is another way naturalization happens. In the mouth. When the word for something becomes the word you use without thinking, the thing itself has already gone native. Officials noticed only what they must. A procurator noted that shipping lists showed fewer failures when certain ports used thicker hemp rigging. A road inspector wrote a fine against a contractor who allowed his work crew to dump redding waste into a stream near a villa owned by someone who never, ever paid fine. The contractor learned, as contractors learn, where to put the next pit and whom to invite to lunch. None of this appears on triumphal arches. All of it holds up arches. In winter, the fort smelled of damp wool, smoke, men, and whatever the quartermaster could burn without making sick the men you needed most. On some nights, when fog pressed so close the torches wore halos, the barracks were quieter than a chapel. A man rolled onto his side and tucked his cold hands between his legs. Another pulled a hat down over his eyelids and made a pillow of his forearm, which he could trust to wake him before he rolled into the wall. The medicus moved between beds, like a priest with a small rite. Cover. Whisper something that turned fear into sleep. Oil helps, not much, but enough for 1 more hour. Ask the provinces when people first smoked it, and they answer with hedges. A watchman in a gatehouse remembers a companion who warmed a brazier with clean, fragrant scraps torn from a rope, and smiled at the way the draft lifted the weight in his chest. A herdsman, on a slow night in a winter hut with a hole in the roof, passed a pipe fashioned from whatever could be spared, and said it loosened the knots under the shoulder blade, where worry likes to tie itself. Maybe. Likely. The record does not care to certify them. What the record tends to affirm is the plant's omnipresence, and the way smoke, when it belonged to frames that already tempered what it could do. The ritual room, the infirmary corner, the brazier in weather that punishes lungs. Everywhere else, the plant's empire was cored, sail, sack, sand, salve. By spring, the wet fields green again, and a new patch of rough leaves along a ditch testifies to someone's habit of flicking seeds into the easy places. Birds come, chat, ignore. A boy picks a leaf to show a girl the way. The palm leaves a dark print when pressed. The way scent changes when bruised. In a week, the leaf forgets them both and continues being a leaf. The legions will move again, and the habit of hemp will stay. Stitched into local time, the empire will shrink and roads will break. And yet, rope will keep being made in long now. Straight sheds and oil will keep being rubbed into hands that must make and mend. The plant did not need a border to cross a border. It needed only a pocket, a ditch, and someone whose work improved when strong fiber was close to hand. The sentry on the rampart watches the road dry from lead to pewter to ordinary stone. The recruits hang their cord and shake rain from their sleeves. The fort exhale. In the narrow world between storm and sunset, an empire within the empire continues its patient work uncelebrated, unargued, unafraid of smallness, tying what must be tied so that people can sleep. Dusk collects in a caravanserai where 4 roads meet like threads at a loom. A gate swings shut. The courtyard becomes a small city of its own pack animals, blowing steam into the cooling air. Traders shrugging weight from shoulders. A cook lifting the lid from a pot that smells of lentils and cumin. Lamps catch one by one along the arcades. Between bales wrapped in oiled cloth and jars sealed with pitch, a few bundles are easy to overlook. Stalks for fiber, sacks of seeds meant for oil or feed, packets of crumbled leaf to be steeped, rubbed, burned, or rarely and carefully drawn as smoke. On the Silk Road, cannabis seldom traveled as a headline. It traveled as luggage. Maps drawn later will straighten these paths. The nights themselves were braided. From the south come merchants who pronounce bang with a soft breath and talk of festival nights when milk turns green and clocks dissolve. From the east, a monk with soot-dark sleeves speaks of mountain hermitages, of smoke that is more incense than indulgence, and of teachers who measure breath with the patience of water. From the west arrive men who bargain in a dozen weights for rope and sailcloth, and who have learned, as all travelers, learn to sleep beside cargo that smells like home. From the plateau ride herdsmen with felt tents whose insides remember steam, hot stone, and aromatic seeds that crackle when tossed into a brazier. The courtyard shows how identities multiply. A healer from Bactra unwraps a packet for a coughing child seeds to grind. Oil too warm. A cloth to wrap around the chest. A sailor's agent fingers fiber, testing squeak and strength. A minor official from a distant court asks the caravan scribe whether a certain herb is lawful in his master's province and is told, with a smile, that law is a weather to be checked daily. The same plant becomes remedy. Rope. Sacrament. Suspicion without changing its nature. People change around it, as they do around wine or music or prayer. Inside a side room, a host keeps a brazier for guests who have walked farther than talk can reach. Smoke in this place is a courtesy tucked inside other courtesies. One traveler warms his hands and inhales the mixed perfumes of resin, bark, and a pinch of green the host adds for a friend stiff from cold. It is not a secret, but neither is it an announcement. In the corner, a scholar sorts rumor from record. He has heard the old steppe tale, tents closed, stones heated, laughter rising, and he writes it down with the cautious verbs that keep a page honest. Said to, reported, may have, tomorrow, under better light. He will compare this note to a line copied months ago from a Greek who wrote as much to entertain as to inform. Beyond the walls, the road ripples with small economy. Rope walks in villages where a long straight lane serves equally well for drying dyed cloth and twisting strands of hemp. Mills where stalks are broken and scraped. Ponds turn to temporary stew for retting. Fields that accept the plant as a second crop when the season blesses them with a longer breath. A caravan does not only move things, it teaches recipes and repair. A weaver hears from a traveler that boiling seed cake left after pressing makes a good animal feed, and a year later her goats look sleeker. A potter learns to cut hemp into clay for temper and loses fewer pots to the kiln. News moves this way, hand to hand, not only mouth to ear. At a shrine outside the town, a caretaker wipes dust from a stone statue and prepares the evening's offering. A wind from the high pass carries the memory of snow even in summer. He places a small cone of incense on a flat rock warmed near the coals. A pilgrim, weary from the road, stands in the doorway and breathes the first draft as if it belonged to him. Perhaps the cone's recipe once included a handful of crushed leaf. Perhaps it still does. Recipes travel like rumors and settle like customs. In one valley, smoke is an embodied prayer. In the next, it is a household medicine. In the next, it is frowned upon unless folded into rites that tidy its edges. The Silk Road's genius was not only east to west grandeur, it was lateral drift. From river towns in Sogdia to oasis gardens in the Tarim, people watched one another and borrowed without the fuss of treaties. A doctor saw a shepherd heat stones in a skin tent and imagined the same heat tamed into a clinic's fumigation for winter lungs. A monk heard of a village drink that softened the startle of grief and decided to learn its preparation, promising himself to use it only where discipline had already done its work. A rope maker admired a knot from a sailor's world and used it to bind a new kind of pack that never slipped on a donkey's back. Contested stories hung around the route like faded banners. A tale about assassins and hashish took on a life of its own in the mouths of travelers who liked to shiver with their supper. A merchant from the Levant rolled his eyes and said that fear is the easiest spice to sell. A scholar marked the anecdote popular and set it beside quieter notes that spoke of gardens, harvests, and the uses of fiber in places where empires came and went. But baskets still needed mending. Sensation makes fast company. Practice keeps the account. When the caravan moved on, the tail remained, and so did the rope. Ports amplified the braiding. At the Oxus, barges nosed down river with cargo holds that smelled of grain dust and tar. Hemp cords held hatches shut against sudden rain. Farther west, at a Black Sea key, a ship's factor checked bales of sailcloth, rejecting any that felt brittle from a bad retting season. He bought seed oil, too cheap in good years, and noted that when mixed with beeswax and a little resin, it made a polish for tools that kept damp at bay. In a Mediterranean harbor that called itself the center of the world while borrowing ideas from its margins, a woman dipped a wick in a lamp filled with pale oil that burned slow and clean enough to read by. She did not ask which road had carried it to her. The flame was answer enough. Not every place welcomed the same uses. A principality that prized stern mornings discouraged intoxicants of all kinds. Another, with a literature that loved the twilight, where thresholds blur, tolerated small, contained experiments. Traders kept a double legend, weights and measures in one column, mood and etiquette in the other. The second mattered as much as the first. A careless word about smoke in the wrong courtyard could empty a storehouse faster than a fire. Wisdom moved with the goods. Know where you are, who you are, a monk, and how the air prefers to be seasoned. Meanwhile, monasteries kept their own tempos. In one, a rule permitted only simple incense and forbade anything that might drag the mind into eddies. In another, a teacher allowed a pinch of something green during winter vigils, when the wind found every crack and the bones rang with it. He called it medicine for long nights, not a ladder to heaven. His students learned a hierarchy: posture first, breath second, attention third. And if, after months of practice, a small smoke helped, then it helped because the other three were already in place. Without them, the same pinch only made a drafty room smell different. If you stood on a tower at midnight and watched the caravans by their fires, you would see nothing dramatic, only the orderly intimacies of travel. A man rubbing oil into a mule's sore shoulder, a woman steeping leaves for a cousin with a tight chest, two apprentices finger-testing a line they have just twisted, proud of the even lay, a monk holding a burner, so a friend can warm his hands and speak at last about a loss he has been carrying in silence. Smoke there, but it is secondary to the work of keeping bodies willing to keep going. So when we ask the Silk Road where people first smoked it, the road smiles a little, like a teacher hearing a clever but misaimed question. Origin matters less than circulation here. The plant learned to answer to many names. It agreed to many roles. It survived suspicion by never insisting on a single face. If a first tent filled with scented steam on a frost night somewhere on the steppe, that steam did not stay home. If a shrine learned to gild its air with a leaf-spiced cone, travelers carried the recipe in their memory and folded it into other rooms. What the road gives back is not a birthplace, but a pattern. Small uses connected across distances until a web appears that no one designed and everyone maintained before sleep. The caravanserai's keeper walks the courtyard with a lantern, counting fires, counting faces. He pauses at the gate to smell the night dung smoke, wet wool, soot, reza, the faint green note he has learned to call by 3 different words, depending on who asks. He nods to the guard, who stifles a yawn. The lamps along the arcade gutter and regain themselves. Somewhere a child, lulled by the low talk of a dozen languages, slips into the soft, practical dark that roads require. The plant is asleep in its sacks and bale, ready to become rope, oil, remedy. Incense on rare nights and in careful company. A breath taken a little deeper than usual, so the body remembers that journeys end best when the mind is gentle. By late autumn, the caravan road grows thin and glassy with frost, and stories grow thick. In tea houses tacked to the sides of passes, travelers trade warmth and talk in equal measures. Among the hardy tales, bandits turn to dust by a sudden sandstorm. A saint who taught a wolf to guard a granary hangs a rumor that refuses to die. Mountain assassins, who take a drug called hashish, enter a trance and kill with a smile. It is a story built for firelight, narrow valleys, hidden gardens, young men shown a paradise so vivid they will do anything to return. It spreads because it is told well, not because it is tended carefully. If you sit with merchants who have counted seasons rather than headlines, the rumor changes shape. They will say the fortress is real enough, perched like a hawk on rock, ruled by a sheikh whose politics are sharper than his knife. They will say the followers are disciplined, clever with disguises, patient with time. But when asked about enchanted gardens and drugged initiations, the elders lean back, sip, and let the heat touch their hands. One shrugged. Another says that fear is a tax you can collect without sending a clerk. A third offers the quiet truth that makes poor stories rich. Men do not risk their lives for smoke. They risk them for belief. Coin, and the complex arithmetic of honor. The word itself, hashishin, slides between meanings like a caravan slipping between dunes. Outsiders learn it as a label with a shiver built in. Insiders use other names and argue about titles, the way lawyers argue about borders. A chronicler in a distant court copies what he has heard, adding a little ink to the fear and a little shading to the miracle, as chroniclers do when they write for readers who prefer edges to nuances. Meanwhile, physicians along the same road keep their notebooks modest. They record a balm for a sore wrist, a fumigation for a winter chest, a seed oil that keeps a belly calm on long ride. The gap between the dramatic and the daily is where misunderstanding breeds. Somewhere in a garden, well below the fortress, no secret paradise, only beds of herbs fenced against goats. A woman kneels to pull weeds. She grows coriander and mint for the kitchen, rue for the neighbor who believes it keeps away the evil eye, and hemp for twine, poultice, and the small economies that give a household its margin. She has heard the stories, too, and they make her laugh in the way practical people laugh at an embroidered truth. On market day, she sells a bundle of fiber to a rope walker from the town and buys a cone of incense to burn during evening prayers. Smoke belongs to worship in sick rooms here, to chores and season, not to myths that flatten people into symbols. In a madrasa courtyard farther west, a jurist delivers a lesson that could be from any age. Intentions matter, measures matter, contexts matter. He speaks of things that are lawful when used for remedy and unlawful when used for heedlessness. He will not name plants. He will name principle. A student raises a hand to ask about a neighbor who uses a perfumed smoke to sleep after a year of grief. Another asks about a cousin who boasts of stupors that steal mornings from work. The jurist answers in practicalities. If the neighbor wakes kinder and keeps his duties, praise the wisdom that found him rest. If the cousin neglects his obligations, warn him as you would warn a friend who drinks wine past sense. What seems like theology is also household management. People keep each other upright by degrees. At a physician's bench, the 30% that belongs to context becomes a quiet ledger of care. Seeds pressed for oil to be rubbed into joints that refuse to forgive cold. Leaves steeped in warm water for a cloth laid across a chest that wheezes. A fumigation made with resin and a pinch of green. During winter nights, when breath feels like it must be reminded of its own path, each preparation carries cautions, not for the feverish, not for the young and less half-strength, not without watching the patient's face for the change that says, enough. The physician has heard the assassin story as often as anyone. He files it under theater. In his workroom, plants are verbs, soften, loosen, warm not banner, of course. A reputation once launched will keep walking. In a Levantine port, a Venetian factor writes a letter home about the sect of hashish eaters because the phrase tastes exotic and will make his patrons lean closer to the page. He does not lie. He chooses a truth that travels fast. A pilgrim in the same city lights a small pipe in a courtyard because his chest has been scalded by dust for 3 days. He draws twice, coughs, and sleeps. No one will write his story, though his is the one that fills the century. Small, ordinary, practical, and therefore durable. Laws try to pin smoke to a wall. A governor posts a notice discouraging idle gatherings that lead to clouded minds. And a poet writes a sly verse that everyone understands as a reply. Mind is a changeable sky. Virtue is knowing the weather and dressing for it. City by city, household rules do more work than decree. In one family, anything that bends attention is locked in a chest and used only under an elder's supervision. In another, a cousin's careless habits lead to a quiet agreement that no one will keep such things in the house at all. The Silk Road teaches manners as much as trade. If you travel, learn to read the room before you season the air. Meanwhile, language keeps complicating the picture in a way that humble readers find more useful than righteous ones. In Persian verse, hashish can be a metaphor for love's unraveling or for the clarity that follows the day's last chore. In Arabic prose, it can be a legal case or a joke. In Turkic markets, it can be a packet bought by a fisherman who wants the stiffness to leave his hands before dawn nets. The same syllables carry different weights depending on who lifts them. That is not evasion. It is a reminder that words are tools that change with the hands that grip them. Now and then the old tale turns violent in the telling again, as if a road cannot bear too much quiet. In a mountain town, after a knife fight, has left a magistrate's nephew dead. Someone drags the hashishin story into the square to explain the world with a single, clever word. The elders answer not with myth, but with inventory. Who owed whom? Which oath was broke? How pride and debt thread together. It is less satisfying than a secret garden. It is more truthful. The road has patience for complexity, because it has seen too many mornings repaired by ordinary things, rope retwisted, mule shod, seed pressed, lamp lit. Ask this part of the world our question. When did people first smoke it? And the reply arrives wrapped in a second question. Why do you ask? If you are hunting a tale about assassins, you will find it in every inn. If you are counting the ways people help bodies endure travel, you will be handed recipes and warned gently to keep your measures small. Physicians, monks, merchants, and mothers do not need origin myths. They need evenings that end in sleep and mornings that start without regret. Night thins along the pass. The tea-house boy rinses cups in water that smokes in the cold like breath. On the table, a merchant smooths a map with his palm. Beside it, a packet of seeds waits to be carried 2 days west to a cousin who has asked for oil this year instead of cloth. A scholar folds his note, satisfied that the loudest rumors are the least reliable, the quietest practices the most persistent. Smoke from the brazier drifts toward the door, as if eager to get back on the road. No one stops it. No one follows it. They have learned what the story could not, that reputation is wind, and remedy is weight, and the plant's many lives are lived mostly below the line, where legends cast their shadows. Night in Baghdad has its own grammar. A first clause of brass lamp light, a second of water striking marble in a courtyard, and an ellipsis of voices under lattice work, where poems try out their final line. In one house, a physician rolls a scroll closed and ties it with a strip of dyed cloth. In another, a copyist sands a page until the ink's shine fades to matte and the letters sit like quiet guests. Somewhere, a jurist leans back from his students and lets a question finish forming in the cool air between palm and pool. The city is a library with alley. Cannabis appears here less as a proclamation than as a polite presence that knows which door to use. Physicians of the period reading Greeks through Arabic lenses, testing the texts against patients with names. File it among the simple, useful when measured, cooling by temperament, capable of loosening what habit and weather bind too tight. A practitioner in Kufa warms oil pressed from seed and works it into the wrist of a scribe who has copied too doggedly all week. A colleague in Fustat steeps a pinch of green with other leaves for a cloth laid across a chest that whistles after dust storms. Remedies are sentences with clauses, never a single word shouted across the room. In courtyards where scholars gather, the conversation holds several temperatures at once. Poets speak in moonlight about longing and return, folding rope, river, smoke, and lamp into metaphors that feel like home. Philosophers make diagrams with their hands, circles nested in circles to explain how the soul calms when appetites take the seat reserved for them and not the head of the table. Jurists, who do not dislike poetry but are married to caution, lay out principles that keep households from drifting. What is licit in remedy may be illicit in pastime. What helps a widow sleep after a season of grief should not be turned into a fashion among idlers. They do not name every plant. They set measures and trust sensible people to pour. Humoral medicine gives the body its weather report. Warm or cool, moist or dry, excessive here, deficient there. Within that map, cannabis, a cooling, drying agent in many formulations, finds work where heat and moisture run too far. A physician observes tongue, pulse, skin, sleep, and appetite before prescribing. He advises not only the mixture, but the hour, the season, the posture afterward. He promises nothing loud. He offers probabilities and the mercy of sleep when sleep is the best medicine the world allows. If smoke is used, it is framed as fumigation for lungs or nerves within a room supervised by someone with a scale for both herbs and outcome. Outside these rooms, the city's hands use the plant as if it were another word for reliability. Rope sellers test coils along a bricked lane. Net makers ply needle and twine at the river's edge. A sandal maker trims straps that will be asked to endure a summer's walking. A cook adds seed to flatbread dough for a nutty edge. A washerwoman rubs a little oil into her knuckles before lifting a load. A calligrapher softens an old brush with a drop because he believes it makes a finer hairline. The plant's smoke is only one of its voices, and not the talkative one. There are houses where talk about smoke is frank and careful. A Sufi teacher practices late-night remembrance with students who have learned the long patience of breath. He keeps a tin of perfumed pastilles for winter vigils, and a rule: discipline first, assistance last, and assistance never without witness. In a different quarter, an indulgent salon recites verses about gardens and ease, while a brazier perfumes the air past usefulness. A host who likes reputations more than mornings will wake late and treat headache with the same leaf he praised as inspiration the night before. The city contains both, and the literature that survives them keeps its verbs modest. Some did, many didn't. This helped. That harmed. Caution belongs to the wise. In a law court, a student asks the question that never quite resolves. What of the man who seeks intoxication? The jurist answers by partition. Wine is named clearly and forbidden in any share. Smokes and scents belong to a different grammar. Licit where they heal or frame worship. Illicit where they displace duty and reason. He tells a story about his uncle, who burned a little incense with mulled herbs to soothe the dying man's breath, so his last hour would be kind. No one in the courtyard mistakes that mercy for license. Doctrine, in good hand, is a way to keep tenderness from making excuses and severity from forgetting tenderness. Texts circulate the way doves do homeward and in loop. A Baghdadi compendium copies a Greek note on seeds and joints, adds an observation from a physician in rites, and subtracts a flourish that doesn't survive the clinic. A Cairene notebook marks which apothecary cuts his oils with cheaper stocks and which presses clean. It also contains a recipe for a sleep draught that mentions cannabis as a minor partner amid poppy, violet, and quince. These notebooks are practical poems, metered by doses, rhymed by caution. They move knowledge forward in steps small enough that the body can keep up. Poetry keeps its own ledger. A ghazal calls the beloved's hair a night of musk, and smoke where the heart loses its way happily. A didactic verse warns laughingly against friends who prefer clouds to work. A satirist skewers a petty official who sermonizes against indulgence by day and cannot keep from seasoning the air by night. None of this proves practice. All of it proves familiarity. People do not joke fluently about what is wholly foreign to them. Within households, the plant's uses are the quiet kind that never reach decree. A mother toasts seeds for a convalescent son who has not wanted food. A grandmother keeps a jar of oil for a knee that complains before weather turns. A father mends a wicker cradle with a length of hemp thread and nods at how it holds. If a pipe appears in the evening courtyard, it is likely old clay handled with the care one gives sharp tools, used rarely, respected, returned to its shelf. Music mentions it less than lamps, because lamps are the nightly miracle everyone shares. Contested claims wander the streets like sellers with too bright wares. Someone insists that scholars of the House of Wisdom inhaled this plant to see the stars more clearly. The astronomer they name smiles and points at scratches on his astrolabe instead. Someone else swears that a saint ate nothing but seed and achieved visions. The saint's students reply that he ate whatever was set before him and saw God in bread as in smoke. Reputation runs faster than evidence. The city, which has seen both caliphs and quacks come and go, prefers receipts what eased whose pain, how much, under what roof. Across centuries, later readers will argue about scale. Was smoking common? In what quarters? At what hours? The sources answer with their usual reluctance. Common enough to be regulated in some places, private enough to avoid record in many, respectable in frames clinic, shrine, vigil where air is already modulated. Suspicious in idleness that borrows sanctity's tools to excuse neglect. The safest sentences are the ones a household healer would recognize. Likely may have, in some districts, under supervision. With small measure, when we ask this era to answer our traveling question, it refuses the trumpet and offers a flute. Where did the people first smoke it? Somewhere others did too, and for reasons that had more to do with care and prayer than with spectacle. In Baghdad, in Cairo, in Nishapur's gardens and Basra's warehouses, smoke was a guest who arrived with purpose and left before overstaying. The courtyards liked order, water, lamp, poem, prayer, remedy, rest. The hour blushes toward dawn. A muezzin's voice threads the dark. In a physician's house, someone ties a final knot in a linen bandage. In a jurist's study, the inkstone dries. In a poet's room, the last line decides not to be clever and becomes true instead. A breeze moves through the lattice, and the courtyard pool grows a shiver of ripples that carry lamplight like coins. Whatever smoke was lit tonight has already thinned to the same air that will cool the stones for morning feet. The city closes its books with gentle hands and sets them where day can find them again. Morning opens like a scroll in a river town along the Old Way Valley. Paper dries on racks the length of a courtyard. The sheets thin as a dragonfly's wing and freckled where pulp held a bit of husk too tightly to let go. A boy walks the row with a bamboo pole to lift each sheet by its edge. The gesture is practiced and reverent, as if he is coaxing light to stay. in the vat beside him. Fibers soften in water, turned cloudy with their surrender hemp, mulberry. Scraps of worn cloth beaten until memory lets them become something else. The water smells faintly green, faintly sweet. When the pulp is ladled across a screen and lifted, a second world appears. A wet page, patient, waiting for ink. Hemp, here, is not a character who asks for attention. It is infrastructure in the Chinese sense, an element of civilization. So intimate people forget to praise it out loud. It threads sandals that cross farm track, keeps the bed cord taut under a mattress of straw, ties a bundle with a knot that opens when pulled the right way and holds when pulled the wrong. It becomes rope, net, bowstring, cloth rough enough for labor, and ground into pulp and taught the discipline of water and screens. Paper, civilization written on hemp. A scholar might mutter without meaning to be grand. He will mean receipts, letters, court orders, poems, sutras, every sentence that lets a day be governed or a heart be eased. In a loom house, open to the lane, a woman beats weft into warp with a shuttle-wide thrum that sets the cadence for the morning. Hemp cloth answers differently under the hand than silk or fine flax, sturdy, honest, less forgiving when the beat grows lazy. The bolts stacked against the wall, smell of sun and dust, their faces faintly ridged like a field after wind. A buyer runs his palm along a length and asks if it will soften with washing. Of course, the weaver said, the way a stony path softens under feet that know it. Not far away, a bowyer tests a new string, hemp laid and twisted to an even temper. Becomes a line that remembers tension without growing bitter. It takes resin, resists damp, and answers the archer's hand with a voice clear enough to be trusted. In a different shop, a sandal maker stitches straps to a sole cut from layered fiber. He grins at the apprentice who has learned to wax the thread just enough, not too much. In the rope walk, a straight lane with pegs at either end, the rope master strides backward, hands working multiple strands at once, while an assistant keeps the twist even. The air hums. Strangers ask about poetry. Locals admire this music. Paper remains the quiet miracle. In a scriptorium that is only a table, a brush, and a good light, a clerk copies an edict with strokes that never hurry. Hemp pulp, beaten sufficiently and strained through a screen fine as mist, yields a sheet that drinks ink without feathering it, a virtue that separates readers from squinting. A monk, intent on a sutra, blesses the consistency of the stack beside him. Another mixes soot and glue and water, until the brush finds the right dark that settles on the fibers like a friend who knows when to stop talking. When a page tears, it is mended. When a character is raw, a small patch covers it, and the line begins again. The culture's memory weaves itself into a texture made, in part, from this plant. Households keep smaller economies in motion. A grandmother toasts seed to sprinkle over congee for a child who is thin after illness. A mother saves the seed cake left from pressing oil to feed chickens and swears their feathers shine better. A fisherman rubs a little oil into the ferrule of a pole. A carpenter polishes a tool handle. A calligrapher softens a stubborn brush hair. The properties are counted not as virtues, but as habits. Oil that burns steady, fiber that resists rot, paper that keeps a line crisp, though the countryside will produce finer materials, silk for beauty, bamboo for scaffolds that vault into the sky. Hemp is the argument for adequacy made perfect. As for smoke, the city knows it as part of other arts. The incense master at the temple mixes cones that wake a room without bullying it. Recipes are handed down with the discretion of stewards who know which scent steadies sorrow and which invite reverie. In medical shops, fumigation sits on a shelf between plasters and syrups, bark, resin, and leaves prepared for cases where lungs need drying, or the muscles behind the eyes need to remember how to unclench. A physician will sometimes add a pinch of green, as his teacher did. When winter rooms grow tight, he will tell the assistant to warm the vessel, watch the patient's neck, and let the session end before ease tips into slackness. Where a pipe appears, it is often clay, humble, and handled without theater. Claims that the empire lived in fog bent by pleasure fail to survive even one day spent among bookkeepers and farmers. Confucian order prefers plain air and clear minds. Taoist practice, in certain houses, permits a smoke that behaves as a servant, not a guest who interrupts a meal. The two temperaments do not cancel. They bracket a custom, though, at most, helps the body adopt the posture the mind requires. A magistrate might frown at people who season the air on idle afternoons. The same magistrate might, on a frost-paned night, allow a brazier in the infirmary to carry a familiar perfume that makes an old soldier stop coughing long enough to sleep. The bureaucracy's genius lies in its ability to dislike excess and still permit mercy. In villages, redding ponds annotate the landscape. Small rectangles dark with water where stalks steep until fiber lets go. Boys dare one another to touch the cold and shout at the stink that hangs like an argument no one can win. Their mothers wave them away and spread bundles on grass to dry. Ropes coil on thresholds, mats wear smooth where feet agree to step every morning. A bride's trousseau includes cloth meant for work, not display. A monk's robe is sewn from fabric that remembers fields. Scholarship, with its neat appetite, keeps records that resist drama. In a Materia Medica, a compiler notes seeds for oil, fiber for cordage and cloth, and, with a cautious hand, uses in fumigation or as minor ingredients in pills meant to cool and dry. He copies warnings beside recommendations. He adds from his own observing, which apothecary cuts supplies and which presses clean. The book is not meant to inspire. It is meant to prevent mistakes. When later readers argue about whether smoke was drawn for its own sake, the ledgers point back to rooms with stated purpose and to a culture that preferred tools to declarations. Meanwhile, poetry borrows without boasting. A verse about longing names bowstrings and ferry ropes and paper prayers burned to send messages upward, objects made from hemp. Assume the way weather is assumed. A rustic poem finds comedy in sandals that outlive the man who complains about them. A monk writes that his thoughts, lately knotted, learn from a rope how to be twisted tight enough to hold, and then, after the task, to hang slack without shame. None of these lines is evidence of a pipe. They are evidence of a plant so embedded in daily competence that metaphors reach for it as naturally as the hand reaches for twine. We should mark, softly, the points of caution scholars prefer. Dating the earliest paper compositions is not simple. Fibers mingle, screens and beating methods evolve, and the name hemp covers cousins as well as the plant itself in some texts. Claims about inhalation must negotiate language that prefers perfuming and fumigation to the bluntness of smoking. Where pipes are named, they often serve tobacco in later centuries, and backward projection is a temptation the past resists. Sentences that begin with likely keep us honest. In return, they let us see a panorama without insisting every tree has a label. If you stand in the paper yard, again at noon, the sheets have stiffened and captured light in their mesh. The boy with the bamboo pole has grown confident lift. Tilt, lean, and the air is full of a soft, papery percussion as sheets are stacked and weighted. Across the alley, the loom keeps its thrum. In the lane, a porter shifts a load of rope and grunts at the fair weight. At the temple, a cone of incense stutters as if thinking, then burns clean. Somewhere, a physician folds a small packet for a patient whose chest prefers winter to be shorter than it is. And he says, as training taught him, to use it under supervision, small quantities. Stop if the brow grows unfocused. Ask this place our question. When did people first smoke it? And it answers with the same calm the paper vat teaches. Agitation produces pulp. Stillness makes a sheet. In China, the plant's greatness is unglamorous. It turns labor into tools and breath into legible words. It keeps sandals mended and arches honest. It sweetens a funeral's air without stealing sense. If smoke is drawn, it tends to belong to rooms where smoke already has a name: incense, fumigation, winter medicine, vigile. The larger story is fiber and pulp, made into civilization's patient muscle. Cords, cloth, pages, the everyday strength that allows an empire to be more than decree. Evening brings the river's color back to the paper yard. Finished stacks lean under stone. The boy rinses the vat and watches the clouded water run clear. He dips his hand to feel what remains a ghost of slickness, the memory of stems made new. A breeze moves through the rack, and the sheets lift just enough to prove they are now their own thing. Light, durable, ready to be written on. The plant has stopped speaking. The page will speak for it. Lamps glow. Somewhere a brush begins. There is a hinge in the store, and it does not creak. For centuries, the plant has worked with its head-down rope. Cloth, paper, oil. See, incense folded into rite. Then, almost imperceptibly, a door opens onto rooms where the smoke itself is the destination. Not only a courtesy on the way to something else, the timing is not a trumpet blast, but a scatter of soft footfall. Here a brazier in a private garden. There a pipe at the edge of a vigil. Elsewhere a hill camp where companions pass a bowl and let the night lengthen into a single gentle sentence. The vocabulary for this is cautious because the record is shy. Yet the contour emerges, a turn from strict utility and framed ritual toward deliberate inhalation, chosen for its own felt shift of pleasure, relief. The uncrowding of thought. Picture a courtyard at dusk in a mixed city harbor. Caravan stop, monastery up the hill, law court near the market. The day has been bright enough to leave edges on everything. A handful of friends gather where vines shade brick, and a small fountain keeps talking to keep people honest. Food is finished. Wine is put away in households that keep dawn's promises. Lamps are fed. A guest produces a little tin. Inside, a herb crushed with care, a paper twist of resin, a sliver of something that smells like the weekend of a temple. No one declares a philosophy. Someone looks at the sky and says that tomorrow will be kind to sailors. They set a clay bowl, add ember, and hold the rim to share a slow breath around the circle. The change is local to each body. A shoulder unclenches. A pacing thought decides to simmer. A wry smile finds its way through a face that forgot it knew how. Talk deepens without sharpening. Silences lengthen without turning to awkwardness. In this mode, the leaf is a social instrument, tuned for convivial ease and the preservation of gentleness. A different door. A single person on a roof after a grief that won't speak plain. The day's work is ended, but the mind has not learned the trick of ending. A small pipe clay, stained, nothing a thief would bother with, waits in a box beside a string of beads. A sprig of dried herb kept for scent in linen drawers. 2 letters tied in ribbon for reasons no one else will ever need to understand. The first draw is almost nothing. The second is a little more. The chest learns how to deepen without tugging. The jaw forgets its news and loosens. The roof air cool. A neighbor's laundry slaps once on a line and then is still. This is solitary use, not to decorate sorrow, not to deny it, but to set a softer radius around its noise so sleep can find a path. The evidence for scenes like this is smoke thin, because people do not report their private mercies to clerks. Yet the materials, the adjacencies, the recipes in household notebooks suggest them the way footprints suggest a body you never see. Between these poles, companionship and solitude, sit the old frames that made smoke respectable. Shrine and clinic. In a chapel, the leaf remains folded into blend, subordinated to a room's purpose. A participant may breathe deeper as incense climbs, and the mind may gratefully adopt the posture prayer prefers. But the leaf's personality stays modest. In an infirmary, a fumigation remains a physician's verb, dry, warm, loosen, soothe, never an ideology. The hinge we are watching, then, is not a rebellion against these frames. It is a borrowing of their lesson. People noticed that air could be taught. They brought a trained air into rooms where no priest presided and no physician counted pulse. They kept, in good cases, the disciplines those rooms had taught, small measure, good company, an intention stated quietly and kept opposition. Where it appears, tends to be prophylactic magistrates, wary of any pastime that steals mornings, jurists defending the boundaries of worship, moralists who know from experience how quickly moderation can lose its job. They are not wrong to worry. Any tool that softens can be asked to erase. But the hinge does not swing only toward stupor. It swings toward a manner of attention many traditions recognize by other names. The slow availability of mind that lets ordinary things be sufficient. In some places, they will call it contemplation. In others, keeping company with the self. In still others, they will refuse to name it at all and show it instead by sitting quietly together until the lamp has burned to a little island of light. The devices themselves change with the hinge. Bowls and braziers with shared embers remain, but small pipes proliferate cheap clay, carved bone, fashioned from reed or metal scraps by hands that know how to blunt in edges and grind a sea. None of this proves a revolution. It proves convenience. A personal pipe is a book you can close when you have read enough. Shared vessels belong to knights that intend to stretch. In places where etiquette fears scandal, the vessel stays low and the ember goes out easily. In other neighborhoods, songs grow slower and faces softer. and a corner of a courtyard acquires a reputation for patience that outlasts the summer. Language adapts to the hinge as if it had been waiting. Poets reach for images that link smoke to the work of remembering and forgetting. Forgetting the day's abrasions, remembering the body's unfevered tempo. Proverbs warn that clouds can become weather if you love them too much. A nurse says, half chiding, half tender, that a little is a blanket and a lot is a fog. A jurist writes a neat sentence distinguishing licit stilling of a noise from illicit abandonment of duty, and householders copy it into margins, where shopping lists and recipes live, because that is where such sentences do the most good. There is, inevitably, a small theater of bravado around the hinge. In some quarters, a young man tries to invert caution into fashion, telling a story that makes the plant a passport to insight, as if ordinary insight were beneath him, as if discipline were merely a trick for people without taste. The elders are kind and a little amused. They have watched dozens of enthusiasms dress up as destiny. What survives is practice. The friend who brings a tin and leaves with tea-washed cups. The parent who refuses a child's request, and later, when that child is older, explains measures and contexts. The host who knows which guest should be guided toward water and a blanket instead. Because sources resist grand claim, we keep our verbs small, likely. In some places, at certain hours, among certain circles, archaeology finds pipes and traces, and literature finds metaphors, and law finds reasons to clarify. Between them, they describe a slope rather than a cliff. That slope does not end anywhere definitive. It vanishes into modern habits that speak more confidently than their ancestors did. For our purposes, the important thing is the shape of the motion. Fiber and paper and rope remain. So did incense and fumigation. To these, the hinge adds a quiet mode, in which inhalation is chosen for its own felt contribution to wakefulness. Mellowed toward sleep, to talk mellowed toward candor, to sorrow coaxed toward rest. If you return to that mixed city courtyard a month later, you might find the same friends under the same vine with a different arrangement of bowls and cups. They have learned that one ember's worth is enough, that a second makes the jokes a little lazy, that a third supposes there is all the time in the world, and then steals it. They have learned to end on purpose, to let the night reclaim its ordinary air, to walk home with feet that know the way by lamp and memory. The host wipes the rim of the bowl and puts the tin away. It will last longer used like this. It will be there when someone comes in from a hard season and needs, for once, to let the shoulders forget their job before the heart remembers its own. On the roof where the solitary pipe lived, the box goes unopened for days at a time. That is also part of the hinge, not compulsion, but option. Not a daily requirement, but a practiced kindness offered, when the weather inside a person refuses to align with the weather outside. The beads in the box learn the same cadence as the pipe. The letters, unread, continue to do their obscure work until they do not need to anymore. Below, the city rinses its streets and ties its cords and sharpens its knives for the next day's bread. The hinge does not announce itself to history. It makes a sound like breath leaving a body without hurry and returning without instruction. Ask this moment our patient question. When did people first smoke it? And the hinge offers a better one. When did people first decide that smoke could be an end rather than only a means? The answer is a scatter of hearths and rooftops. Across centuries, a pattern that only reveals itself when you step back far enough to see how many small lights were lit for company, for ease, for the practice of staying. The plant, which had already built the day, began here and there to help build the evening too. It did so best where people kept the lessons of rope and paper in mind. Strength by measure, texture by design, use by intention. The bowl cools, the friends rise, the door closes with the same soft latch as before. The hinge, pleased with itself for not becoming a spectacle, keeps the room true to its own breath. Dawn in an upland shrine begins with a hush that feels practiced. Stone holds the night's cool. A brazier keeps a red eye beneath its ash. Two priests in white step softly, girdle cords snug at the waist, and feed the fire a measured pinch of fuel. The air changes by degrees from cold to capable, from blank to slightly resinous, as if the room were remembering its job. A low chant threads the kindling noises, breath stretched into syllables that steady the hands. When the coals brighten, one priest crumbles an aromatic blend, onto the heat. Resin tears, shaved wood, a spice whose name has walked too many roads to be sure of itself. Perhaps, a trace of a leaf that makes the smoke turn grassy at the edge. The flame is not the point. The tending is, to the west and earlier. On floodplains written with reeds and law, scribes inked recipes that modern readers lean toward with hopeful eyes. In certain Akkadian and Assyro-Babylonian texts, a word appears often transcribed as qunnabu or qunnabu inside lists of perfumed oils, medicaments, and fumigation. Scholars suggest kinship with cannabis. Others hedge, noting the slipperiness of plant names over long centuries and many tongues. In some tablets, the material is steeped into oil used for anointing. In others, it partners with aromatics in rituals meant to cleanse a room or a body's mood. The verbs are steady, not sensational. Crush, strain, warm, apply, fumigate. We are safest with careful language, likely may have. Appears to, between these river rooms and the fire temples of the plateau, runs a belt of practice that treats scented air as an instrument. A court physician in Nineveh oils a stiff shoulder with a preparation that includes a green note beside cassia and myrrh. A household healer burns a little blend under a basket to dry a child's damp cough. A priest marks a boundary in smoke the way a surveyor marks one in twine. If inhalation occurs, it tends to occur in frames already built to moderate it, curative, purifying. Preparatory not as a pastime that demands attention for its own sake. The textual silhouette of smoking is faint. The silhouette of fumigation is strong. Back in the uplands, the Zoroastrian sanctuary is a chamber for exactness. The fire attar is a guest that shares the room with law. Acedia is the enemy. Sloppiness, a cousin to impurity. The ritual rhythm is not about trance, but about right relation. Mind, breath, flame, word. When the priest ladles fragrant grains onto the coals, the smoke that wakes is an offering that returns to the world, a little cleaner than it came. Some modern storytellers wedge cannabis into this moment as a master key. Disciplined readers resist. The tradition's center is the custody of fire and truth, not intoxication. If a pinch of leaf ever entered the mixture, it did so as one scent among many. A servant inside a choreography whose aim was moral clarity, not clout. Language helpfully complicates certainty. Etymologies braid and fray across time. Qunnabu may point toward cannabis. It may, in certain contexts, point past it to families of plants that share uses and name. Greek and later Latin words drift in, and with them come habits of analogy that make philology a field of moving targets. What steadies us are the verbs that repeat across strata: warm, soothe, dry, perfume. Consecrate in the rooms that do not change their furniture quickly. Clinic, storerooms, shrine. Inside those rooms, plants are measured, not mythologized. A small scene in an Assyrian townhouse. A midwife warms oil over a lamp and crushes a few seeds into the dish before rubbing the mixture into a young mother's lower back. She learned the recipe beside a woman whose memory ran back 2 floods. She changes the ratios with the season. Across town, a scribe copies a perfumery list. Cedar, cypress, calamus, qunnabu, honey. Wine quantities precise. Cautions breathe. He does not debate metaphysics. He keeps markets and bodies from getting lost. By caravan, formulas and words made the short, long trip east into Iranian valleys, where kings built terraces and truth-tellers argued in halls lit like sunrise. There, incense and law learn to share a table. A magus lifts a spoon of aromatics toward the altar and names 3 virtues. An apprentice memorizes the same 3 in a voice that never quite finishes breaking. If a traveler from the rivers gifted the temple a sack of leaf and seed, the priests would have sorted the contents as any competent household would. Fiber for cord, seed for oil, leaf if clean and fitting for certain blends. When winter and sorrow made the room meaner than it should be, the plant did not define the rite. The rite defined what the plant could do. A caution belongs here about a different plant entirely. Hayoma, revered, debated, sung about. It occupies a ritual peak of its own pressed, strain, offered. Some have speculated about connections with cannabis. A larger scholarly current resists, pointing to botany, philology, and the specificity of rites. It is safer and truer to the temper of the evidence to keep the 2 lines from collapsing into one. Conflation satisfies a hunger for neatness that the past rarely shared. Night returns to the plateau chapel with a sky so dry the stars sound crisp in the ear. The fire has eaten its measured ration. A lay worshipper steps inside with dust at the hem of his garment and labor in the hinge of his back. He inhales the room's mild perfume resin, ash, a green hint that could be a leaf or a memory, and finds that his shoulders remember how to lower. He will tell no story about this. He will sleep. In the town below, a rope maker ties off a coil of hemp. A physician notes that a certain anointing eased a trader's hand enough to hold a stylus properly again. A caravan clerk writes good in a margin beside a bale of fiber that arrived dry despite a week of rain. Ask this region our question. When did people first smoke it? And the answer is a polite redirection toward verbs and rooms. In Assyria and Babylon, formulas that likely touch cannabis lived in oils and fumigations. In Iranian fire temple, smoke was a disciplined medium, not an escape. If someone lifted a pipe or a bowl for the plant's own felt shift, it likely happened at the edges of these frames, in a quiet corner after a rite. In a winter house, where lungs needed asking to behave, the record grants us careful adverbs occasionally, locally, under supervision, and denies us trumpet. In the shrine, the priests tidy the rim of the brazier with a ring of ash, so the coals look as if someone had drawn a careful circle around their works. They close the door with the gentleness of people who trust hinges. The smoke that has traced the room's boundaries thins into the larger dark. Down in the house lanes, a lamp is pinched out with moistened fingers. A clay pot of oil cools on a sill. A child stirs and settles. The plant, which has lent scent to devotion and softness to remedy, sleeps in bundles and jars. The fire, which is the point, keeps breathing like a lesson. Wind combs the steppe like a hand through coarse hair, and the tents answer by tightening their ropes. Toward evening, a small band of riders returns to camp, horses dark at the withers from sweat, faces salted white where the day dried on the skin. They unsaddle without hurry. Children run the perimeter with a barked dog's enthusiasm. Elders make a low fire that takes to fuel as readily as the land takes to hooves. When the dusk has finished its slow turn toward night, a felt tent is closed, flaps peg, seams pressed, and the work of warmth begin. Herodotus stands at the edge of this scene the way literature always does when it borrows its eyes, close enough to admire, far enough to misunderstand. In his telling, the Scythians heat stones in a pit, carry them into a small tent, and throw hemp seeds onto them. The seeds crackle, release a smoke so delightful that those inside shout for joy, and the bath needs no water. The passage has traveled centuries with the amused authority of a traveler's anecdote, precise enough in texture to feel true, embellished enough in tone to make modern readers lift an eyebrow. It is our job, this far along the road, to hold both the image and the caution. Inside the tent, practicality structures pleasure. Two men lift a basket of stones from fire to pit. A third adjusts a lattice of green sticks above them. A fourth settles a felt cover so the dome holds air the way a drum holds sound. A woman brings a small pouch in which seeds are kept for many uses: food, oil, medicine. Tonight, a handful for the stone. When they strike the heat, they pop softly. A kitchen sound in a different room. The first breath drawn is more temperature than scent. Hot, forgiving, quick to pry cold from knuckles. The second carries the grassy edge that the plant gives when it meets flame, shoulders unknot. A laugh returns from somewhere it had been saving itself. Men who have learned to control their voices so as not to spook horses, let them lengthen. The joy, Herodotus's word, is audible. And not because anyone is drugged into forgetting. It's the sound of relief escaping. Steam baths are a grammar people reinvent wherever water is precious or fire is safer in clothes. Here the verb is improvise. A skin of water sprinkled on the stones makes the room inhale and exhale like an animal. A handful of seed tossed on the heat adds a perfume that might also carry a small kindness to muscles and mood. And if a knee stiffened by riding relaxes more willingly. If a back that forgot to be young remembers. If a man who has stood guard against wind that sharpens every edge can put the edges down for a while. Then the recipe has worked. Whether anyone would call it smoking in a doctrinal sense matters less to the people inside the tent than the fact that breath is behaving again. Archaeology, which is suspicious of anecdotes but kind to durable things, has offered its own shy corroboration. In certain kurgans on the high fringes of the steppe Altai, for example, excavators have found small braziers, sometimes with scorched stones and residues of aromatic seeds. In one grave, a leather pouch with hemp seeds lay where a hand might have been able to reach it in life. Scholars debate particulars, which species, which use, which room of the living the burial goods mirror. But as a constellation, the finds sketch a habit seed, heat, enclosure that fits Herodotus's silhouette without requiring us to accept his exuberance wholesale. The verbs we keep are the same ones we've kept elsewhere. Warm, loosen, purify, rest. Around the tent, life that does not need writing continues. Writing itself. A girl braids a lead rope with a small, competent frown. A boy checks a knot at a cart's corner, dissatisfied. Reties it with the tidy authority of someone who has watched his mother fix too many things to leave this one imperfect. A grandmother pinches a child's ear for stealing the warmest place by the hearth and then yields it anyway. Hemp threads through these economies. Cord for the yurt's guy line, twine for saddlebag, coarse cloth for a sleeve that will forgive being used as a potholder, seed pressed into mash that keeps sheep shining through winter. The smoke is a guest at many of these tables, sometimes invited, sometimes merely the kitchen's generous residue. Herodotus's phrase, shouting for joy, tempts the modern imagination toward indulgence, as if the camp were a nightly carnival. But the steppe teaches thrift in all things, not only food and fuel, but also sensation. Joy here tends to be rationed to what keeps tomorrow possible. Hot broth after a cold ride, a horse's breath on a palm, the private comedy of a child's serious face. The bath with seed belongs to that category. It's a repair shop for bodies that spend themselves outdoors. If laughter rises, it does so within the frame of recovery. This much and no more, enough to make sleep arrive without dragging. We can imagine, without making a museum out of the tent. Variations that keep the practice from hardening into a single script. On a night of injury, the heat might carry a pinch of additional herbs the healer knows to be helpful for swelling. On a night of mourning, the tent might be larger, the stones more numerous, the breath shared among kin until the room smells of smoke and salt, and the human animal deciding again, against odds, to continue. In early spring, when the thaw turns, tracks to glue and spirits to a thin patience, the seed's perfume might be welcomed not only for what it does to sinew, but for what it reminds the nose about fields to come. What about pipes? The record gives us very little to praise or deny with confidence. Containers that can carry embers from fire to mouth appear in many places and times. That some were used for the plant we're following is plausible. That the steppe invented the device as doctrine is unnecessary. The tent, with its controllable weather, does the same work for groups that a pipe does for an individual. It sets a boundary around heat and air, so that change inside the body can be trusted and stopped. If a pipe appears, we can keep our verbs cautious, perhaps in winter huts during what? Perhaps among scouts who preferred not to steam and let the tent remain the image that best fits the sources. One should mark. 2. How the plant's other lives accompany the steam. Hemp's fiber suits a people who need strength without delicacy. It is patient with clumsy hands and quick repairs, which is to say it respects urgency. A broken rein mended with hemp will hold until leather can be found. A child's belt, woven from it, will outlast 2 tunics and the child's sudden growth. A yurt's rope, retightened after wind, will forgive the unevenness of pegs hammered into half-frozen ground. A culture that knows a plant this intimately is unlikely to treat it as either a demon or a darling when it becomes heir. It will treat it as it treats horses, partners, not mascot. The Greek observer's genius and his fault is to shape disparate reports into a story that traveled. He likely never stepped into such a tent. He likely knew a man who knew a man who did. His sentence carries the temperature of second-hand heat. We can keep his picture and lower its volume. Exchange the exclamation point for a period. Reduce the spectacle to a practice. Turn shouting for joy into the relief sound men make when cold finally lets go. The steppe does not dislike joy. It distrusts waste. A bath that allows sleep is not waste. What remains by the time the tent is opened is instructive. The air that rushes in feels thin after the saturated dark. Stars look like nails hammered into an enormous bowl. Those who shared the heat cough once, then breathe with the measured greed of people who understand value. Outside, horses shift and snort, finding their own balance between vigilance and ease. A woman tips a skin to the stones to seal the night's work. A man sweeps ash into a circle with a handful of brush, so morning will find the place tidy. The pouch of seed is retied. The tent seam is checked by habit. Nothing in the camp announces a miracle. Everyone moves as if repaired. Ask the Scythian knight our patient question. When did people first smoke it? And the wind may steal the words and give you back a better image. Heated stones, a felt rune, a practice that rises to meet weather and wear. The steppe's answer is neither origin myth nor denial. It is a picture of a people who learn to teach air what bodies need without scripture, without decree, without the urge to turn a working method into a banner. If smoke was drawn more directly by pipe or bowl in other seasons, other corner, those acts live in the same grammar. Small measure, good reason, ends named in advance. The tent opens. Night folds itself neatly along the horizon. Children go sudden silent with sleep. Elders tuck embers as if putting a child to bed. The wind keeps combing the land, looking for snags and finding none. Somewhere a rider checks the knot on a lead rope by feel and smiles at its truth. The plant, which has threaded cord through their days, has crossed the evening to thread breath as well. And the camp, wrapped in its ordinary competence, learns again how to lie down without bracing against the dark. Pilgrim roads wake before markets did. Lanterns stumble along the edges of dawn, while roosters argue in overlapping jurisdictions, and river towns feel their harbors think about morning. In one such town, a shrine keeps watch at the head of a ferry ramp, whitewashed walls, a bell with a voice like warm bronze. A notice board, the color of old tea pounded by rain into kindness. Travelers pass through in the tense quiet that precedes decisions. Stem, cross, climb, cert. Between the shrine and the water, a narrow lane carries everything civilization has learned to stack bundles. Basket, sacks, jars, ropes, sandals. Patience. Here the plant does what it does best. It appears in many guises and asks for no heraldry. A ferryman checks the ferry's mooring with a length of hemp line and ties a quick hitch. He will untie one-handed when he's ready to push off. A vendor, before unrolling a mat of figs, rubs a little oil into his wrists that have learned the art of carrying more than the body seemed built to carry. A woman repairing a basket by the shrine step threads a needle with twine that makes a sound like a match being struck. The stitch holds. A novice sweeping the threshold catches a whiff of last night's incense, still clinging in the corner's resin, a hush of wood smoke, and a faint green edge that could be line, could be leaf, could be the mind supplying a memory it wants to keep. Pilgrimage is an economy of small repairs. Feet blister and are mended, promises fray and are retied. People on the road learn to accept help from places rather than just people. A tree's shade at the right hour. A public fountain kept true by the diligence of a widow who lives in the house behind it. A shrine that lets the body remember how to slow down on purpose. In such rooms, the air is a participant. The caretaker warms a burner not as spectacle, but as hospitality, the way a host sets out water and bread. Recipes drift between sites, never entirely the same twice, but recognizable as kin. Resin for setting apart, bark for warmth, a measure of leaf that bends mood toward soft attention without commandeering it. Some travelers breathe deeper. Some keep the breath shallow and rest instead in the pattern of arrivals and departures. Names spoken, candles trim, strings retie. From river ports, the practice folds into trade without anyone needing to explain it to anyone. Boatmen who spend their lungs on fog and rain accept fumigation the way they accept oiling the wrists and knees at day's end. Their families call it common sense. In warehouses, where bales and barrels make miniature geographies and dust keeps the ledgers guessing, a clerk allows the infirmary corner a small brazier on damp days, and the same corner becomes a station for thank yous when a back remembers how to behave. Ports are impatient with abstractions. They prefer verbs attached to objects that can be weighed. Smoke, here, is a tool that fixes people enough to finish work and get home with the mind left over. to welcome a child's voice. Inland, along pilgrim roads, those cords that bind shrines, towns, and seasons the plant keeps its social shape without asking for a capital letter. A roadside rest house lays out mats at dusk and lends a brazier to whoever tends it with care. One night, that means a group of weavers on their way to donate cloth to a temple. Another night, it means a widow and her brother walking a vow into the world, 1 mile at a time. The weavers bring stories about a hill shrine where incense is green-tinged and seems to make grief take a cleaner breath. The widow brings a silence that asks nothing and receives the smell of warm ash like a hand on the shoulder. In the morning, the mats are rolled and tapped free of dust. The brazier is emptied and rinsed. The road reclaims them both without argument. Festivals enlarge every rhythm. Lamps multiplied by 10 mashun, drums that fold a day into a single beat. Roads that feel like rivers of ankles and sandals and deliberate cheer. In such crowds, smoke is choreography. Temple attendants move as if along lines drawn on the air. Refreshing burners, keeping doors open, letting the inside mirror the outside. If a plant's leaf has been folded into the recipe, it must submit to the festival's logic. No private weather inside the public one. No slackening that would make devotees stumble on stairs. The scent wanders, attached to no face, and does its modest job pointing attention toward the god without stealing the attention for itself. At night, when the lamps wash everything in honey and the gong tells the town how late it is without shame, the last incense cone tumbles into ash, and no one explains a thesis about anything. They just go home. From time to time, a traveling preacher or magistrate takes offense at rooms that season their air too liberally. Complaints rise, as complaints will, about idleness, impropriety, the dangers of turning worship into indulgence and medicine into habit. Sometimes they are right, and the practice retracts to its proper size. Sometimes they are merely speaking the old human preference for control over nuance. In districts where such warnings carry weight, households learn discretion. A pipe, if one is kept at all, lives on a shelf behind a basket and comes down only under elder eyes. A brazier's recipe is tuned toward a stricter harmony. Elsewhere, under gentler weathers of law and custom, the practice hides in plain view the way kindness does. Visible to those, it helps, and beneath the contempt of those who look only for occasions to scold. Merchants teach another lesson. In ledger books that leave room for both arithmetic and memory, a trader notes that rope from a particular valley is less likely to rot. Oil from a certain district burns without a petulant smoke, and incense blends from a hill town carry a clean green that calms certain customers who spend their lives arguing prices. Over time, preferred routes emerge that have less to do with distance and more to do with the quality of what returns along them. Goods that endure, scents that steady, tools that do not demand too much of the hand that uses them. These cells of reliability shrine, shop, rope walk. Clinic link into veins stronger than any decree. Smoke's reputation rises or falls along the same capillaries as bread and truth. In villages along pilgrim spines, redding pits and rope sheds sit as close to the shrine as the bellcaster's shop. The plant's utility flanks its occasional heir. A farmer, on his way to offer thanks for a son's recovery, stops to ask the rope maker whether a new knot will keep the granary door from finding its own way open in wind. The rope maker demonstrates with the patience of a teacher who prefers proof to praise. Later, the same farmer kneels in a room where yesterday's incense is a memory in the plaster and learns the tolerance that says, intention matter, measures matter, context matter. He carries both lessons home, how to bind what must be kept and how to breathe when the mind insists on sprinting where walking would do. At river crossings where ferries move news as reliably as people, rumors travel about pleasure houses of smoke in distant cities. The boatmen laugh in a register that means they've been young and are not yet old. Such rooms exist, of course. Every century builds corners where moderation forgets its name. But they do not define the water's edge. The ferry's rope, cleated and clean, defines it. The ledger that balances across seasons defines it. The way pilgrims and traders and children and elders share space without bruising one another defines it. In these settings, smoke is tolerated where it behaves as a citizen and told to leave when it behaves like a lord. We can be exact without being stern. Along ports and pilgrim roads, the first-person act of smoking cannabis likely appeared most often as a secondary effect of rites and remedies, fumigation. Incense, the steam of a tent then, gradually and locally, as a modest, deliberate practice in private or small company, where the purpose was named and the measure kept. Pipes and bowls show up where they are useful, not where they can be displayed. Recipes drift and settle. Communities edit them the way they edit lullaby, leaving what works and discarding what makes mornings worse. Toward evening, the river regains its color, and the shrine's bell learns the day's last job. The ferryman loosens his knot and pushes off, the rope skating through his palm with the confidence of fiber that knows this crossing as well as he does. On the steppe, the basket mender ties off her last stitch and warms her fingers over a brazier. Someone is kindly left alive for a late passer-by. The caretaker opens the doors to let the air become only air again. Whatever smoke lingered takes the invitation and goes. Travelers settle their bundles under their heads and sleep with the ease that belongs to bodies that have been competently handled. In the morning, the road will assume them again, and the rooms that shape their breath shrine, ferry, stall will become scenery, while the lessons they held keep working quietly under the skin. Morning begins where work waits. A courtyard swept to the color of straw, a kitchen that smells like yesterday's ash remembering flame, a wall hook where a coil of twine hangs between a sieve and a ladle, like a sentence balanced between clauses. In such rooms, the plant we have been following lives without announcement. It is a length of cord tied around a jar's neck so the lid won't lose itself. It is a handful of seed toasted in a pan until the nut scent rises and becomes appetite. It is a thumbprint of oil rubbed into a wrist that has carried water since before the light. The public stories tend to belong to shrines and ships. The private competence is kept here, beneath the polite noise of roosters and the clockwork of chores. A grandmother, every village has one, keeps the household pharmacopoeia like a soft-speaking sovereign. Her shelves hold jars that echo the local weather, dried leaves for fevers that like to linger, roots for colds that lie to you and promise to leave, flowers for a sleep that refuses to arrive when asked kindly. Somewhere among them sits a small tin of seeds and a bottle the color of pale straw. She does not call it a cure, she calls it useful. When her daughter returns from the fields, with a shoulder that lifts only halfway, the grandmother warms a spoon of oil over the stove's quietest flame, tests a drop on her wrist, then works it into the muscles with a patience that has made bread for decades. If the shoulder lowers and breath remembers how to widen without complaint, the oil gets the credit only after the hands do. Recipes in these rooms change more often than doctrine. A chutney that once used sesame might, in a season of shortage, include hemp seed instead. The flavor will shift toward earth, and the family will decide whether to keep the change. A poultice taught by an aunt who learned it from a midwife across the river may gain a pinch of crushed leaf when winter stiffens spines. The instruction that accompanies it small, enough. Stop when the brows loosen, travels with the recipe like a note pinned to a child's shirt. Households learn the grammar of measures because mornings punish extravagance. They prefer relief that still allows dawn to be useful. In a different house, a boy sits with his grandfather, mending a fish trap. The older man works twine through the lattice with a needle carved from bone, then hands the tool over so the boy can try. The boy pulls too hard, tears the weave, winces. The grandfather says nothing, only takes the needle back and shows how to pull just enough, how the fiber wants to cooperate if you give it the angle it prefers. The lesson is not only about cord. Later, the boy will see his mother brush oil into a woven mat so it will lie flat after rain. He will smell the faint green, nut-sweet breath of it and understand that usefulness comes in more flavors than strength. At night, after a day has used the body the way fields use boot, small fires write their notes on the air. Beside them sit ordinary remedies with ordinary name. A cloth steeped in warm water and wrung dry becomes a comfort for a chest that whistles. A pinch of leaves in the kettle's steam teaches sinuses to open their windows. Now and then, a pipe appears clay, chipped, old enough to have its own place on a shelf above reach of children. It comes down under eyes that have learned to count. It visits for a minute or two. It returns to its dust ring. If it helps an elder sleep, when the hinge of the back argues with blankets, The household calls that mercy and leaves the philosophy for people who prefer talk to care. Women's knowledge threads the plant through seasons in ways ledgers rarely catch. In spring, seed that wasn't good enough for sowing becomes breakfast. In summer, stalks soaked in a barrel behind the bathhouse teach patience and courage to anyone who has to stir the pit. In autumn, fibers combed and twisted into twine stack up in a basket by the door, awaiting tasks no one has met yet. In winter, a jar of oil is rationed to last, teaspoon by teaspoon, across cold that makes wood sting the hands. Beside those practicalities are the notes that never make their way into books. Do not warm the oil too quickly. It turns bitter in the nose. Toast the seeds until the skin shines, not until they darken. The leaf adds nothing when grief is fresh. Wait 3 days, then the air will understand what you are asking of it. In a back room where a baby sleeps, the world's louder remedies are turned away at the door. A mother sets a saucer of warm water near the brazier and adds a drop of oil and a shred of resin that a cousin brought from a hill shrine. She sits and watches the way the small vapor moves in the room, not toward the baby's face. Not insistently, just enough to make the breathing sound less like an argument. When the child settles, the saucer is removed. If anyone asks later what cured the fussing, the mother will list the day's small mercies: a walk outside, a clean cloth, the relief of being held. And yet, perhaps the air learning to be kinder for a little while. She will not generalize. Children keep scholars honest by refusing to be theories. Men, for their part, are not excluded from these rooms. A mason returns with dust in his throat and sits by the door while his wife unrolls the family's small kit: a cup of warm water, a pinch of salt, a little spoon of oil to coat what grit has tried to scratch. He does not argue. He has learned that the quickest path back to himself runs through letting someone tend him. If a neighbor stops by with a small bowl and a rumor about a new mixture that made his uncle feel like he could dance at 70, the wife laughs softly and offers the proper sequence. Eat first, drink second. Try the neighbor's trick if you must, but only after the dishes are washed and tomorrow's bread is started. So the morning is defended against the evening's optimism. We should mark the caution that scholarship keeps returning to. The household record is rarely written. Where it is, the notes are recipes, not confessions. A margin might read, oil 2 spoons, rub ankles, market day, and a later hand might add, and shoulders before the harvest. Claims that villages smoked themselves into philosophy deserve the same smile as claims that they never seasoned their breath at all. What emerges from kitchens and courtyards and bedside is a picture of use attached to purpose, moderated by elders, adjusted by women who have learned the limits of bodies by loving them daily. On some nights, gossip strays toward the city's more theatrical corners, a room where men pass pipes until speech grows syrupy, an alley where boys perform sophistication by pretending to be ruined. The household listens with that mixture of curiosity and disapproval that villages keep for fashions that waste daylight. A comment is made about how much oil it takes to rescue a body from the consequences of pretending not to have a body. Someone quotes a proverb that arrives in many languages with the same sense: a little is a blanket, too much is a fog. The talk returns to practicalities. Who will mind the goats when the market runs late? Whether the new twine holds better in rain? When to start soaking the next batch of stock? In the quiet after chore, women teach daughters how to inventory a room by scent. The pantry should smell like dry grain and confidence. The kitchen like smoke that remembers food, not smoke that refuses to forget itself. The sleeping room like clean cloth and ease. If a visitor's pipe leaves a presence that lingers too long, windows are opened. Conversation is gentled toward a close, and the pipe learns it will be invited again only if it understands the grammar of hospitality. Households guard mornings the way moneylenders guard ledgers, without drama, without apology. Ask this private world our traveling question: when did people first smoke it? And the answer comes folded into other answers. When the room needed to change its weather for a reason that could be named. When a body asked for sleep and would not otherwise accept it. When a vigil wanted soft shoulders and steady breath. Pipes and bowls appear as tools, intermittent, modest, supervised. Fumigations remain the elder sibling, easier to defend to neighbors and gods alike. The Leaf's public life festival, clinic, Caravan finds here its backbone. Women who measure, men who accept tending without embarrassment, elders who say enough at the right moment because they want tomorrow to arrive whole. By the time the house goes dark, lamps pinched, embers tucked under doors worn smooth by hands. Remembering locks without looking, the plant has worked a full shift without asking for thanks. It held a basket's shape. It slicked a hinge. It seasoned a room into kindness. It taught a joint how to forgive the day. A coil of twine swings once on its hook and grows still. In the bedchamber, breath even. The courtyard, swept clean, accepts the moon as a guest. It is hosted often enough to know where the light prefers to lie. If any smoke rose today, it has already dissolved into the larger night. What remains are the rooms themselves competent, plain, ready, and the knowledge that in the morning, the same hands will make the same small agreements with usefulness and mercy, until usefulness and mercy feel like the same word. Weather shifts without moving the land. Morals do the same front sliding over fields of habit, bringing a brightness that clarifies, or a fog that excuses, then passing on while the ground underneath continues its work. If you map the plant's long companionship with people, you see not only roots and rooms, but climates of judgment that change how the same act is read. A pinch added to incense becomes devotion in one quarter and pretext in another. A fumigation is medicine here and an indulgence there. A pipe drawn twice at dusk is a modest blanket in one culture and an affront to the morning in the next. The leaf does not alter as quickly as opinion. People supply the weather. Consider, first, two neighbors in the same civilizational house. Tayo and Li ways, we often translate as the flow of things and the form of things. Taoist practice, at its best, trusts the body to find the ease it was designed for when we stop arranging it too hard. It blesses methods that make stillness easier to inhabit. A wisp of smoke that quiets the chatter behind the eyes fits that temper when measured and framed by discipline. Confucian habit, allied to civics and kinship, prefers the virtues that keep morning's coherent clarity, restraint, the clean line between private mood and public duty. It can allow a brazier in a winter infirmary and forbid the same scent in a study hall. Neither position is hypocritical. Each protects a value that would be poorer without its neighbor. The compromise that emerges in many towns is practical. Smoke behaves like a servant in rooms where breath is being taught, temple, clinic, and stays in its tin elsewhere. Now look across the water to a people who wrote their laws on stone and their lessons on behavior into satire. Romans loved tools that built daylight, roads, aqueducts, rhetoric, baths. Wine diluted and scheduled made social thought possible without breaking the next day. Incense at the shrine made reverence legible. In that scheme, a plant that fed, oiled, and tied the empire together wore a crown of usefulness. The same plant as free-floating fog raised the old suspicion that idleness will always save its hardest work for tomorrow. Physicians kept smoke in the register of fumigation. Moralists kept jokes sharp for men who admired haze. Between them, ordinary households made the settlement that empires always make. Mercy at the scale of a spoon, suspicion at the scale of a fashion. Sail the caravan routes, and the weather ruffles differently. Jurists across the Islamic Commonwealth argued intention as carefully as dosages. What steadies a widow's sleep after grief is not the same as what steals the artisan's mourning. Remedies and rites have containers. Pastime should not steal the forms of prayer to excuse itself. A Sufi circle might keep perfumed pastilles for winter vigils under the rule discipline first, assistance last. The market quarter might roll its eyes at salons where fog becomes furniture. In those cities, the line between licit and idle is not drawn with a spear, but with housekeeping. Can the user keep promises? Are mornings harmed? Does the practice answer to a purpose named in advance and stop when the purpose has been served? Even in places where law slept lightly, reputation policed better than decrees. Ports that tolerate everything grow careful about one thing: throughput. If a smoke helps backs hold out for another tide, it is welcomed. If it turns forearms slack when lines must be pulled, it is scolded into a corner. Pilgrim towns learn to season air without tilting it. Incense that gathers attention rather than scattering it. Recipes that refuse to take center stage. Villages. Trustees of mourning allow a pipe under elder eyes and do not keep it where children can reach. Everywhere the refrain returns, spoken in dozens of languages in kitchen. A little is a blanket. Too much is a fog. Stories complicate weather, and weather complicates stories. The assassin rumor, those gardens fed by drug and promise, blew through mountain passes because fear is aerodynamic. It suited magistrates who wanted a clean noun for tangled politics. It suited taverns that preferred a shiver to a ledger. The quieter truth that most uses belonged to clinic, shrine, and household needed less wind. It traveled packed into recipes and tied to reminders like stop when the brows loosen. The moral weather that mistrusts spectacle made space for this modest air. The weather that craves villains amplified the other. Both climates exist in every century. Which one you feel depends on whose door you open. The body itself offers counsel that precedes law. It knows the difference between relief and surrender. Relief is the margin that lets the hand finish mending the net and still have patience for a child's question. Surrender is the slide past measure, after which tomorrow walks in wearing your face and finds your promises still asleep. Cultures articulate that animal wisdom in their own dialects. A Stoic says keep the helm and allows assistance when mastery stays intact. A Taoist says do not push the rib and accepts a smoke that helps the current resume its core. A Confucian says rectify name and refuses to call pastime medicine or devotion. A village grandmother says enough and has never read a treatise because climates move. The same street hosts different weather in a single lifetime. A city that once scolded incense out of private rooms might later, after a winter of coughs no doctor could fully cure, permit supervised fumigations in clinics and discover that mercies require naming before they can be delivered. Another city, weary of evenings that steal dawn, might narrow the windows and watch mornings heal. The plant remains what it is. People move the isobars. Literature records the shift by tone. Poems that once joked about fog grow tender towards small blankets. Sermons that once thundered grow deft at distinguishing help from habit. Devices teach manners, and manners teach devices. Shared bowls advise conversation to walk, not run. Small pipes advise solitude to stop before spiraling. A brazier in a temple insists that breathing be part of a ritual with a beginning and an end. An infirmary vessel demands that someone with training take responsibility for when the session begins and when it stops. As personal pipes proliferate, etiquette learns to save them for rooms that can afford softer edges, to let them cool before goodbye, to keep them out of hands that want more than they can carry. These are not laws. They are weather vanes, turning toward conditions that protect mornings and keep nights kind. We should admit that every climate has its storm. There are rooms that season their air until speech forgets how to stand. There are magistrates who outlaw mercy and call the triumph virtue. There are saints who mistake suffering for purity and libertines who mistake novelty for freedom. The plant is not a cure for any of that. It is a mirror that fogs slightly when breath draws close, revealing how a culture arranges care and permission, duty and rest. Some evenings, the mirror shows a face softened just enough to forgive the day. Other evenings, it shows the outline of a habit that will need pruning. The wisdom is not in the tool. It is in the gardener. When we ask the moral weather to weigh in on our traveling question, when did people first smoke it? It sidesteps the calendar and answers with a rubric. When there was a named purpose, a frame, and a measure. In Taoist hills, when breath needed a hand and teachers were watching. In Confucian town, when an infirmary claimed the exception and the ledger approved. In Roman harbors, when fumigation belonged to clinics and incense to shrine, and rope kept the day honest on the road. When the room's air was being taught to behave, and mornings were guarded from theft. The earliest smoke that matters to ethics is not the first spark in a tent. It is the first agreement about how to keep the ember from wandering. Night gather, which is another way of saying rooms remember how to be gentle. In a courtyard, a host lets a bowl cool and pours water instead. In a study, a magistrate closes the window on a neighbor's brazier and returns to a ledger that will help the city wake well. In a temple, an attendant empties ash into a garden where even the residue serves something green. The moral weather tonight favors clarity with allowances, and people who have work tomorrow keep that forecast. The plant rests where responsible hands left it. Breath evens. The sky, unbothered by us and our story, goes on practicing the one discipline all climates share. Arise, change a little, leave, and let the ground continue its quiet competence. Empires are woven before they are written. The loom comes first, then the archive, then the anthem. If you follow the plant we've been walking beside, you can watch that weaving take shape in places that prefer competence to ceremony. Rope walks the length of street, sail lofts that smell of tar and sun-warmed fiber, scriptoria where a thin brush follows a line like a sparrow along a fence. The loud parts of empire trumpets, treaties, triumphal arches or decorations hung on structures that hemp helps hold up, rigging that keeps a yard steady in crosswind, seams that keep a sail honest when a storm decides to interrogate it, cords that keep crates stacked and scrolls tied, and bridges persuaded not to remember how rivers argue. At dawn in a shipyard, the air is a mixture of sap, brine, and human plan. A rope walk the long, straight nave of this secular church already hum. Boys carry spindles. Men lay strands. An old rope master strides backward with a practiced swagger, arms choreographing torque, while an assistant watches for uneven lay. Hemp fibers retted, broken, scutched, hackled become cords, then line, then hawser. Each upgrade feels like a promotion with more responsibility. When a finished coil is hoisted to a dolly, a foreman runs his palm along it and nods in the quick, priestly way that blesses the day's first tool. This is empire at its most persuasive. Problem solved before speeches. Across the yard in a sail loft, women and men stitch with a rhythm that suggests both prayer and arithmetic. Panels of coarse canvas, hemp and flax mixed to the ratios a captain trusts, meet under needles as long as a hand. The seams grow into geometry, triangles and trapezoids that teach wind where to live and where to leave. Tar is heated and brushed along edges that must not fray. A sailmaker shows an apprentice how to seat a grommet so the rope will not chafe its throat raw in a gale. On a wall, a chalk outline remembers the shape of a mainsail that carried an entire season's cargo without complaining. In this room, politics has nothing to add. The work is its own diplomacy with weather. Harbors are parliaments of necessity. A linesman shoulders a hawser and drops it over a bollard that has learned the shape of strain. A mate calls time to a crew hauling together so a hull will kiss a dock without bruising either. A stevedore ties his load high against a cart's spine with a hitch that will flick free when it's time, not before. Hemp's voice is in all these motions, coarse, reliable, unpretentious. When a coil is cut, the ends are whipped to keep the story from unraveling. When a line is retired, it is cut into lengths for lesser job, as if empires understand inheritance better than they claim. Without this way, grain stays hungry inland, letters arrive too late to prevent war, and lamps burn dry in monasteries, where someone is trying to finish a page. Far up riveted, a clerk unties a bundle of scroll, the cords leaving faint spirals in the paper where they rested. Hemp has been beaten into pulp, and given its second life as a surface where memory can dry. The clerk's brush moves with a posture learned from a line of teachers who believed that a government's kindness begins with legibility. Receipts, edicts, pleas, poems. Each is a sentence that relies on a page that does not fuzz at the edges or smudge its own meaning when folded and unfolded 20 times in the hands of people who sweat because work requires it. Civilization written on hemp is not a metaphor here. It is inventory. In an archive room that smells like starch and dust and a little like honey, cords tie bundles by arraign, by district, by tax. By mercy granted in a dry year. A scribe runs his thumb under a knot until it loosens, reads a petition that asks for an extension on a levy. Because a flood came late and left silt on barley, like a blessing that needed time to become one. The petition is written in a careful hand on paper that was once a stalk in a field, then a mess in a vat, then a sheet on a rack, now a request that will sway a magistrate if the magistrate has learned to prefer justice to punctuality. Hemp's third life after fiber and paper is as a civics teacher. Roads and bridges deserve their share of credit. Engineers set ropes across spans that do not yet exist, so men can walk hand over hand with tools and bravery into the space where stone will later pretend it has always been. Scaffoldings are lashed into temporary cathedrals of planks. A rope's lay is the difference between a platform with bounce and a platform that translates tremor into failure. When the bridge opens, dignitaries will smile for carvings. They will not think of the temporary cords that taught stone how to become permanent. The cords won't mind. Their work is to disappear in the provinces. The same plant keeps smaller empires of competence alive. A mill uses hemp belting to convey grain. A smith binds a bundle of rods for tempering. A caravan leader trusts lashings to hold when a downhill run asks everything of brakes and oaths. On a farm's threshing floor, a woman braids a new rope to replace the one that held through 3 winters and finally asked to be retired. She tells a child to fetch the oil and rub it into the finished length so it will forgive rain without sulking. The child asks how much. Enough, she says, which is a unit precise to households and useless to bureaucrat. While fiber binds the day, smoke travels the way music does, person to person, room to room. Never the empire's main business, and therefore sometimes able to cross borders where armies fail. A sailor who learned in one port that 2 careful breaths after a storm calm the body without stealing the morning will carry that knowledge folded into his kit like a charm with no superstition attached. He will show a friend on a night when hands shake after a near thing. He will forget to mention it on nights when ale is sufficient. A clerk whose teacher kept a brazier in winter for chest-tight students will keep one too, and will institute the same rule his teacher did. Supervise, measure, door open. On a caravan road, a monk who breathed a certain incense in a high hermitage will recognize the cousin's scent in a valley shrine and feel, not holiness as such, but continuity. The human arrangement by which rooms help bodies remember what the mind asks of them. Suspicion moves as quickly as recipes. A magistrate in a port city publishes a stern notice against foggy evenings after too many clerks arrived late. A month later, the rope walks complain that productivity has fallen because a frightened infirmary stopped its winter fumigations and half the shop is coughing. The notice is amended to make room for cure under supervision. This is empire at its most honest. Rules adjusted to reality by people who live close enough to ropes and lungs to see which parts of law serve mornings and which parts serve only the illusion of control. The plant has no opinion. It accepts sanctioned work as gladly as it accepts common sense. In a monastery that keeps the empire's memory when palaces forget it, a librarian ties off a repaired manuscript with a ribbon of hemp and shelves it where damp will bully it less. The room has its own climate. Dry, cool, faintly perfumed by cedar boxes and the ghost of ink. Here hemp is everywhere and nowhere the page, the tie, the sandals on the librarian's feet. A novice slips in coughing after sweeping the courtyard in wind that carried dust from a road too busy to settle. The elder gives him warm water, then lights a little pastille and sets it by the door where it will perfume the space without becoming the subject of it. This is what the plant does best in rooms like these. Contribute without introducing itself. On a quay at sunset, a ship's rigging takes the light like a drawing, done with one long pencil line. A bosun runs a palm along a stay and feels the place where tomorrow will require a service splice. He will teach it tonight to an apprentice how to untwist without unfaithing the rope. How to marry ends, so the line forgets the wound, he will say, as his own teacher said. That strength is not in a single fiber, but in the twist that asks many to share the load. Empires love this metaphor because it flatters their self-image. The rope does not care about metaphor. It cares about angle, friction, patience, and the honest humility of checking work before calling it done. Meanwhile, a small bowl passes among friends in a cove where the law's lanterns do not reach. 2 breaths, quiet talk, the shared sense that the day can close its ledger without argument. Tomorrow those same hands will climb rat line. Splice, lasher, copy manifest, bargain for pilchards, work that forgives small blankets and punishes fogs. The bowl's journey is not seditious. It is continuity across speech communities. Sailors, clerks, monks, mother. No decree wrote this path. It learned itself in the margins, where kindness survives regulation. Scholar, faced with the scale of all this, prefer restraint. They remind us that hemp's imperial service is well documented in fiber and page. That inhalation, where it appears, is often bracketed by rite and remedy. that private use grows where frames teach safety, not where fashions demand spectacle. They refuse a single origin story for smoke because empires are not good at single anything. They suggest, instead, that the plant's cultural empire rides on the back of its material one. The more rope and paper moved, the more recipes rode along. The more rooms learned the manners of air. Ask empire itself our unwearied question. When did people first smoke it? And it answers by pointing at infrastructure. The earliest smoke that helped the polity was the smoke that kept men sleeping in barracks instead of coughing, that steadied hands to copy law legibly, that let sailors unclench after a gale without spending the next day in apology. Everything else grew where people had already built the habits that make permissions safe: supervision, moderation, purpose. The plant's fame rode ships and scrolls. Its breath traveled in pockets and in the fibers of stories told low while coiling line at dusk. Night brings a clean wind. Coils stacked along the quay settle with a faint, satisfied crackle. In the sail loft, someone snuffs a lamp with damp fingers and listens for the way. Silence returns to a room that has been loud with good work. In the archive, a clerk ties a bundle with a square knot and sets it on a shelf that will outlast a dynasty. Somewhere, below a wall where the tide hisses like a scribe's brush on paper, two friends share the last ember and then blow it out because tomorrow must be ready. The empire, unaware of being held together by plants and hands, sleeps. The plant, stored in coils, bolt, sheath, tins, waits for morning and the chance to be useful again. Some centuries change by invention, others change by furniture. The 17th was a room refitted across 3 empires: the Ottoman, the Safavid. The Mughal new devices for teaching air multiplied. Pipes like reeds, bowls like small moons, stems that cooled breath through water so it arrived mannerly at the mouth. Tobacco was the loud traveler that justified the hardware. But once the room learned the posture of smoke, how to gather around it without losing mornings, other leaves visited as quiet cousins. A coffee tray joined the assembly, then a chessboard, then a lute. Cities learned an evening grammar in which talk rose and fell on measured inhalations and cups that were refilled before they were empty. Picture an Istanbul coffeehouse with windows just high enough to borrow light without borrowing the street. The brazier is a small sun. Embers are quartz. A boy works tongs with the delicacy of a calligrapher and knows who prefers which heat, which draw. Long-stemmed pipes chubuk rest along a rack like instruments sleeping between recitals. The house serves tobacco by default, yet now and then, in certain corners at certain hours, a different scent threads the familiar haze, a green, resinous note woven into the same apparatus, sometimes alone, sometimes in company with the leaf that arrived on ships from far seas. The word for it is local and shifts with districts. The etiquette around it is stricter than the laws. 2 draws soften shoulders. Talk deepens. 3 draws tilt the table. The proprietor's eyebrow is a gate. The lesson is not about daring. It is about cadence. Over in Isfahan, a courtyard catches shade from a chenar tree trained on a trellis. A kalyan water pipe rests beside a tray of porcelain cups, its glass belly remembering the color of the last tea. A scholar writes a line in the margin of a commentary. Breath should not think itself important. A friend arrives, removes shoes, takes the stem after it is offered with the half bow that keeps evenings from becoming afternoons. The mixture is mild, prepared by someone who learned proportion the way bakers do by standing near elders and watching faces. It is not advertised, it is understood. The water sings a steady vow. Poetry is recited, corrected, forgiven. If a pinch of cannabis sometimes replaces or accompanies tobacco, the discipline of the room. The room refuses to let any ingredient pretend to be the host. Delhi, meanwhile, lives on verandas. A hookah gurgles in the shade while accountants count. A courtier writes flares of praise for a prince who prefers gardens to campaign tents. A physician evaluates a patient's cough by listening with one hand to the chest and with the other to the rhythm of the pipe. Cannabis has older names here. Bang when pounded into a cooling drink. Ganja when leaf is dried for burning. Karas when resin is collected from flowers with patience and good weather. Festivals carry bang as easily as processions carry drums. Kitchens understand measures the way musicians understand keys. The hookah learns to be a pluralist. It welcomes whatever the household's grammar permits and refuses what steals speech from sense. Servants know the rule. Refresh the cold, not the guest's judgment. These devices democratize and domesticate what shrines and clinics long curated. The waterpipe, especially, is a school in moderation. It cool, slow, gurgles a metronome, against which boastfulness sounds childish. Coffee's arrival tempers heaviness with wakefulness. Tobacco's stimulus recovers edges that incense would blur. Cannabis, where present, rounds corners that commerce has sharpened too precisely. Different rooms edit the recipe by intent. A poet's circle chooses the blend that makes silence as eloquent as speech. A merchant's club prefers the ratio that sharpens calculation without inviting the brawl that wine sometimes does. A household infirmary keeps a separate jar labeled for winter lungs only. And the jar lives behind a curtain, not out of shame, but out of respect for tools. Law and sermon reply in waves like weather off a headland. Bands flare and recede. Taxes try to domesticate habit. Preachers praise clarity and warn against fog. In some cities, the coffeehouses shuttered one week and crowded the next. A pendulum powered by taste and enforcement taking turns. What persists beneath the edicts is the social proof of mornings that still function, where proprietors keep time, refuse excess, seat quarrels wisely apart, and attend to the dignity of work that begins at dawn. Authorities learn to treat these rooms as civic organs rather than vices, where fashion outruns measure. The door remembers how to lie. The vocabulary of smoke acquires new synonyms. Tar, bowl, hose, coal, draw. Also, pause, listen, wait your turn. Devices teach ethics by design. A long-stemmed pipe insists on unhurried passing. A kalian multiplies attention because the same water belongs to all. Small chillums, handpipes, concentrate responsibility in the palm and therefore in the person. House rules flout. No stem to the lips without wiping. No ember refreshed without someone's eyes meeting someone else's to ask. No mixtures served to strangers stronger than the house's lightest until they've proven they keep mornings. Under these ordinary agreements, a quiet practice becomes a culture rather than a headline. Travelers notice, and as travelers do distort in the telling. A Venetian writes home that Persians bathe their minds in scented clouds. A Frenchman sketches an Ottoman coffeehouse with more cushions than chairs. Because cushions satisfy a European hunger for indolence, it can safely condemn. A Mughal diarist teases a rival for making a garden party into a fog, then admits in a footnote that a spring festival without bang is like a poem without its last couplet. What to do with these sources? Read them for rooms, not for claims, for choreography, not for judgment. The reliable details are always small. The size of a coal, the sound of water, how often cups are rinsed, who sits near the door. Economies convert habit into tray. Glassmakers learn to blow bulbs that don't crack with quick changes of temperature. Metal workers turn stems that thread cleanly. Farmers plan fields that feed both rope and bowl. Apothecaries, rich in vocabulary, make menus, warming, but not so much as to excite. Cooling, without dampening the courage. Sleep welcoming, not stealing. In some districts, Karis becomes a craft resin gathered by hands that know how to be gentle, its reputation swinging between medicine, devotion, and pastime depending on who keeps the ledger. The best shops keep two ledgers, one for coin, one for mornings. Storms arrive, as they always do, by empire and accident. In Egypt, soldiers in foreign uniform will one day forbid what they do not understand, and then, when wine proves more troublesome than leaf, reconsider. In India, distant administrators will order inquiries in a language that does not know how to pronounce the village's word for enough. In port cities from Algiers to Basra, sailors will carry devices and habits across thresholds harder to police than borders on maps. None of this is a straight line toward permissiveness or prohibition. It is an archive of experiments in public breathing. What of the claim that this is the birth of recreational smoking as a widespread norm? Safer to say generalized. The technology spread the skill spread the choice called for etiquette. Etiquette trained desire. Pleasure appeared. Yes, but so does a civic conscience that insists the evening pay rent to the morning. Rooms that keep that covenant survive crackdowns and fashions alike. Rooms that don't become anecdotes, then warning, then empty. In the margins of all this, the old frames persist. Clinics still fumigate carefully measured remedies. Shrines still season attention without kidnapping it. Households still keep jars for winter and tins for festivals. The new devices do not abolish the older grammars. They translate them into vernacular. A coffeehouse with a strict host is a secular chapel. An apothecary with a cautious hand is a clinic without the beds. The plant, which once had only sacred and medicinal passport, acquires a third stamped convivial with conditions. Walk one last time through the three capitals by night. In Istanbul, a storyteller ends his tale with a flourish that makes the room laugh, then hands the stem to a man who has been quiet all evening because work has been loud all day. The man draws once, twice, and says nothing, which is the point. In Isfahan, the water in a kalyan catches a lantern's reflection like a coin that keeps its value. A boy wipes the stem before passing it to an old woman who once taught him fractions by cutting almonds, and both of them pretend not to notice the exchange of roles. In Delhi, a festival crowd thins to families walking home with flowers in their hair. A servant carries the household hookah like a sleeping child carefully, upright, aware that the ashes are not yet ashes and can still set a rug alight if the family forgets the discipline that keeps gentleness safe. Ask these rooms. Our untiring question, when did people first smoke it? And they answer with hardware and manners. When bowls and stems taught air to be shared. When water learned to cool and slow. When coffee learned to keep thought awake while smoke asked it to be kind. When proprietors and parents invented rules that put mornings in the will. When law learned which doors to leave ajar for remedy and which to close against fog. The date is less a number than a sound, the water's vowel, the coal's small sigh, the consonant click of a cup set down gently because someone is speaking, and the room has decided speech is worth protecting. Centuries turn like pages, and sometimes the corner folds itself. Steamships shorten oceans. Telegraphs teach distance to count faster. Newspapers multiply mornings. Smoke, which once traveled in pockets and stories, begins to ride crates and policy. A leaf that used to be mostly local grown, prepared, understood within the temper of a town, finds itself translated into many languages at once. Customs ledgers, medical journal, police notices, club menus, the grammar of use that household, shrine, and clinics built over long patience meets a new syntax. Empire administration, industrial pace, urban novelty, and reformers who prefer clear answers to careful ones. In one direction, the story gathers in salons. Paris discovers a taste for the exotic in the 19th century coffeehouses with North African lamp, velvet corners where talk performs itself, little clubs that season evenings with pastes and pipes. While a painter makes the shadows busy, and a poet notes the room's temperature in adjectives, hashish becomes a stage name large enough to hold many substances and methods. It promises inspiration. Scandal, a passport to the parts of the mind that prose likes to rent, but not buy. These rooms are not the beginning of anything essential. They are a mirror the age holds up to itself. Pleased by the costume and unsure about the face. When mornings falter, the mirror is blamed. When a good paragraph happens, the mirror is praised. Household wisdom, watching from the provinces, shrugs and returns to work. A little is a blanket, too much is a fog. In another direction, the story is administrative. The British count, as the British do. In districts across India, they learn local words with the humility of shopkeepers buying. Ganja, Karas, and ask questions in ledger. Who makes, who sells, who suffers, who thrives. What harms are named by doctor? What comforts are claimed by villager? What becomes of mornings? The answers, over years, take the shape bureaucracy can understand. Licensing, taxes, toleration for festival and household measures, suspicion for mixtures that travel without purpose. Reports write a language more tempered than pamphlet. Harms exist, benefits exist. Excess harms most, moderation harms least. Prohibition promises more than it delivers and costs more than it admits. It is not romance. It is the slow arithmetic of rule. Ports pull the tail sideways. Cairo opens a cafe and closes it and opens it again. The law breathing with politics, commerce, and the city's talent for compromise. Alexandria learns European moods quickly and forgets them at the rate ships turn around. Algiers sits between worlds and becomes a translator whose accent depends on the wind. Across these thresholds, the plant moves as what it has always been: fiber for rope, seed for oil, leaf and resin for recipes that live in kitchen, infirmaries, and, increasingly, in rooms that sell moods by the evening, where proprietors remember that mornings belong to cities. Rooms learn their manners and keep their permits, where fashion outruns measure. Reputation catches up with a sheriff at its elbow. Industrial time presses on all this. Factories teach clocks to shout. Shifts demand sleep. Be obedient. The new poor shoulder a schedule that will not forgive lateness, and the new rich decorate lateness as if it were character. Under this pressure, the leaf can become either a small tool, 2 quiet breaths after work so the jaw does not take its anger to the table, or a fashion that steals the next day. The difference, as always, is frame and measure. Clinics still fumigate lungs grudged by winter. Households still rub oil into joints before supper. Shrines still season attention, and yet novelty produces its theater. A pipe becomes a performance, a posture. A newspaper column decides to argue with a habit as if the habit were a parliament. Cities learn again what villages never quite forgot, that practices are best governed at the scale of rooms, not headlines. Meanwhile, science, which likes sharp nouns and testable verbs, begins to take the plant apart. Apothecaries become chemists. Tinctures find labels that travel through pharmacies. Doctors write case notes that praise, doubt, and measure. Some praise too warmly and call the plant a key to many doors. Some doubt too broadly and call it a thief of all locks. A minority mind their scales and discover it is neither key nor thief, but a small, temperate instrument that does the work it has always done when supervision and intentions share a bench. In hospital, the leaf often yields its seat to siblings, poppies distilled. Gas is bottled because medicine is learning to speak doses instead of prayers. Yet the old verbs soothe, loosen, help sleep, do not retire. They change uniforms. The Atlantic world invents new music and new fear at the same time. In one quarter, players who work nights and sleep afternoons share recipes for endurance and ease. In another, papers that prefer a villain to a nuance learn to conjugate a panic. Laws tilt, then lurch. Some countries, eager to reassure themselves about mourning, outlaw what they cannot be bothered to understand, and in doing so, teach markets to wear masks. Other countries accept the ledger's older counsel, license, what, tax, tolerate, teach children measures the way you teach them not. There is no single weather. There are neighborhoods of weather and families that refuse to let the climate do their thinking for them. The plant's oldest lives rope, cloth, paper. Oil, meanwhile, are pressed by new material. Cotton monopolizes acres. Steel wires sing a higher note than hemp rigging. Petroleum arrives with its bright, impatient chemistry. Hemp learns new jobs belting. Composites and loses old ones sail, much of the fleet's rigging. Yet in households, the twine remains on its hook. In archives, the paper still surprises the hand with its confidence. In workshops, the oil still does what it does on wood. Empires change furniture. Competence keeps its drawer for tools that do not fade. Immigration is another quiet hinge. Plants cross with people. A grandmother brings a recipe in a folded scrap. A sailor brings a habit wrapped in silence and offers it to a friend on the kind of night when words do not fix what waves broke. A laborer brings seeds that become a backyard pat, not for scandal, but for oil and birds, and the satisfaction of growing the familiar in a yard that does not yet know his name. Law notices late, as law often does. It chooses too large nouns, as law often does. Communities answer with what they have always had. Rooms where elders keep measure, and the door stays open when it should, shut when it must. By the early 20th century, loud claims compete with careful ones. International conferences convert moral weather into treaty clauses. Pamphlets preach tidy catastrophes. Doctors argue that pain and sleep are not enemies, and that tools which help them need not be saints to be allowed in hospitals. Some states experiment with blanket bans and discover what anyone who has ever raised a teenager could have predicted: That forbidden air finds lungs with more drama and fewer instructions. Others remain pragmatic control supply. Name harm, teach moderation, prosecute fraud. Leave households the dignity of their own competence. What of first smoking? Our question that refuses to retire. In this era, the answer, if it must be new, is not a date, but a distribution. Devices and trade make deliberate inhalation available to more kinds of people in more kinds of rooms than before. Newspapers and sermons make it contentious in ways that shrink or swell according to fashion. Law lifts and lowers its hand with rhythms better explained by politics than by medicine. The old frames persist beneath the din. Clinic, shrine, household. The new frames, coffeehouse, club, veranda survive. Where they adopt the old lesson. Protect mourning. A small inventory of honest scenes fits inside this century as neatly as inside any other. A nurse in a winter ward warms a vessel and watches a patient's face for the sign that ease has arrived and it is time to stop. A clerk at home after a punishing week lets 2 careful draws lower his shoulders and then goes to bed with the book he had meant to read for months. A festival field sways with drums. A stall sells cups dyed green by herbs and milk. An aunt pours with her thumb over the rim, the way her mother taught her enough. Not more. A reformer, earnest and tired, demands clarity and receives it in small gifts. Rooms that keep rule, proprietors who say no, neighbors who knock at 10 and ask gently for air. Night in a city that has learned to breathe both ways looks ordinary from above. Lamps like a patient constellation, avenues like rivers, windows with their private climates. Somewhere, a rope on a bridge creaks. Somewhere, a press prints sheets that will be read in streetcars by people who would like their mornings unmolested. Somewhere, a family pinches a lamp and a grandmother checks the shelf where the household's remedies live. Glad for what the world has invented and stubborn for what it must not forget. The plant that began this story as stalk and fiber stands now in more jars and tins and statutes than it ever asked to. Its best rooms still know its best manner. Ask these decades for an answer, and they correct our question. Not first, but how, where, and why? How? With devices that slow, cool, share, with measures that end before the ember owns the night. Where? In clinics and shrine, in households and clubs that keep covenant with dawn. Not in spectacles that recruit fog to make an argument. Why? For sleep, for ease, for an evening that remembers the morning is real. The plant does not mind how many languages say this. It minds whether the room does what rooms were invented to do. Teach breath to meet time without fear. Morning arrives with the ordinary bravery that keeps civilizations from fraying. Kettles on, doors unlatched, ledgers open, tools found where careful hands left them. The plant we followed stalk, fiber, oil, seed. Smoke wakes in all its familiar disguises. A twine loop holds a child's lunch pail. Paper waits for signatures that decide modest mercies. A craftsman rubs a thumb of oil into wood that will become a handle and then a habit. In another set of rooms, clinic, courts, parliaments, the day remembers that breath, too, is a civic subject. What once lived mostly in shrines and households now stands beneath brighter light. Studies with controls and cohorts. Laws that distinguish possession from commerce, medical from pastime, help from harm. Policies that learn, then unlearn, then learn again. The 20th century, which loved thresholds, made one more. War taught anesthesia's power and danger. Medicine learned to weigh relief against risk in finer grains than prayer alone could offer. Some countries kept the pragmatic ledger license here, warn there, leave households their competence, tax where appropriate, prosecute fraud. Others, persuaded by panics that travel faster than proof, outlawed what their grandparents had managed by room-sized rules, and in doing so invited markets to invent theatrics and shortcuts that mornings cannot afford. Later, a slower weather reasserted itself. Juries, doctors, and parents joined to say that bans, which ignore bodies, make liars of laws carefully, fitfully. Districts rewrote sentences so the verbs matched outcomes: treat, supervise, educate. Measure while reserving their loudest penalties for those who sell harm disguised as help. Science, patient when funded, fidgety when starved, dismantled and named. It found families within families and messages inside molecule. Trials praised here, doubted there, and most honorably admitted uncertainty where uncertainty remained. A cautious consensus emerged in places that trusted data more than applause. Some preparations soothed pain, resistant to other tools. Some eased nausea that mocked food. Some helped certain minds sleep without stealing the next day's compass. None of this made the plant a saint. It made it what households had already suspected: useful when framed, troublesome when flattered, safest in rooms that keep morning's promises. Culture, which prefers stories to graft, taught itself new manners for old devices. In one neighborhood, a vapor's cool discipline replaced pipes that burned too hot and too long. In another, tinctures returned to medicine cabinets with labels that spoke doses instead of folklore. A few rooms mistook novelty for wisdom and relearned the ancient lesson about fogs. Many more rooms practiced the even older lesson about blankets. 2 breaths and talk becomes kinder. 3 and jokes get lazy. 4 and tomorrow pays a bill it did not owe. Elders said enough in voices that knew the weight of that word. Young people learned to recognize hospitality by the window that opens as easily as the tin. Law's more durable progress showed up not on podiums, but in forms. Expungements that let a morning arrive without the past shouting at it. Clinical pathways that let physicians recommend without winking. Rules about packaging that remembered children have hands and curiosity. Taxes that paid for the very education that keeps use from becoming habit and habit from becoming harm. Where regulation followed the body instead of the headline. The civic air improved. Where it chased a scandal, it caught only echoes and left the room unchanged. And yet, beneath these modern garments, the old choreography persists. In winter, a nurse warms a vessel and watches a patient's face for the exact moment when ease arrives and the session should end. In a temple, a caretaker seasons the air with a blend. The school of elders measured generations ago so attention can bow without drowning. In a kitchen, someone toasts seeds for congee and rubs a little oil into a wrist that has carried too much day. On a roof at dusk, a single person, honest about grief, uses a humble pipe twice, not as spectacle or solution, but as permission for sleep to find its way. None of these rooms asks history to applaud. They ask morning to approve. We have walked far enough to answer the question that sent us out with lamps. When did people first smoke it? The archive resists a single trumpet. It offers instead a constellation. On the steppe, heated stones in a felt room. Seeds crackling. Relief audible and decent. In river kingdoms, tablets listing qunnabu among oils and fumigations. Verbs that keep their voices low. In Greek and Roman clinics and shrine, perfumed air and poultice. Smoke as instrument. Not etiquette. Along pilgrim roads and caravan courtyard. Recipes that travel by memory, framed by purpose. In Baghdad's courtyards and China's paper yard, fiber and page as empire's quiet bone. Smoke folded into rites and remedies. In early modern coffeehouses and hookah verandas, hardware and etiquette teaching evenings how to share breath without stealing dawn. In modern city, science, policy, and household wisdom relearning how to say together. Measure, supervision, intention. Stop. If there is a first, it is not a date, but a decision repeated across centuries and geography. To teach air a small mercy with a nameable purpose, inside a frame that knows when to begin and when to end. Pipes and bowls made that decision portable. Braziers made it communal. Laws made it legible. Households made it honest. Every time the practice forgot its frame, mornings corrected it. Every time law forgot the body, rooms corrected law. So we return, as bedtime stories do, to the threshold where we began. A listener under blanket, a fan whispering its even vow, a curiosity set gently on a pillow beside comfort. The plant we trailed is not a hero or a villain. It is a worker, sometimes clumsy, sometimes gifted. Best employed by people who know what job they're hiring it to do. Rope, cloth, paper, oil. These are its day shift. Inhalation is the evening overtime. Granted when needed, declined when not, ended with the lamp. Cultures that thrive learn to keep both schedules outside your window. The night has already filed its report. Lamps soften. Streets become sentences the city will finish in the morning. If any smoke rose in any room near you tonight, it has done what history asked of it or been asked to leave. Either way, Breath will go on practicing the oldest discipline we know. In, out, repeat. Work, rest, repeat. Care taken, care given, repeat. The wandering leaf keeps its small place in that rhythm, soothed and puzzling as ever, which is to say human.